On the morning of September 11, 2001, 19 men armed with box cutters directed by a man on dialysis in a cave fortress halfway around the world using a satellite phone and a laptop directed the most sophisticated penetration of the most heavily defended airspace in the world, overpowering the passengers and the military combat-trained pilots on 4 commercial aircraft before flying those planes wildly off course for over an hour without being molested by a single fighter interceptor. These 19 hijackers, devout religious fundamentalists who like to drink alcohol, snort cocaine, and live with pink-haired strippers, managed to knock down 3 buildings with 2 planes in New York, while in Washington, a pilot who couldn't handle a single-engine Cessna was able to fly a 757 in an 8,000-foot descending 270-degree corkscrew turn to come exactly level with the ground, hitting the Pentagon in the Budget Analyst Office where DoD staffers were working on the mystery of the $2.3 trillion that Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld had announced missing from the Pentagon's coffers in a press conference the day before, on September 10th, 2001. Luckily, the news anchors knew who did it within minutes.
Osama bin Laden.
The pundits knew within hours.
Osama bin Laden.
The administration knew within the day.
Terrorists who committed these acts and those who harbor them.
And the evidence literally fell into the FBI's lap.
That a hijacker's passport was found blocks from the World Trade Center crash site, if you can believe that.
But for some reason, a bunch of crazy conspiracy theorists demanded an investigation into the greatest attack on American soil in history. That investigation was delayed, underfunded, set up to fail, a conflict of interest, and a cover-up from start to finish. It was based on testimony extracted through torture, the records of which were destroyed. It failed to mention the existence of WTC-7, Able Danger, P-TECH, Sibel Edmonds, OBL and the CIA, and the drills of hijacked aircraft being flown into buildings that were being simulated at the precise same time that those events were actually happening. It was lied to by the Pentagon, the CIA, the Bush administration, and as for Bush and Cheney, well, no one knows what they told it because they testified in secret, off the record, not under oath, and behind closed doors. It didn't bother to look at who funded the attacks because that question is ultimately of little practical significance. Still, the 9/11 Commission did brilliantly answering all of the questions the public had, except most of the victims' family members' questions, and pinned blame on all the people responsible, although no one so much as lost their job, determining the attacks were
failure of imagination.
Because
Nobody in our government, at least, and I don't think the prior government that could envision flying airplanes into buildings.
Except the Pentagon, FEMA, NORAD, and the NRO. The DIA destroyed 2.5 terabytes of data on Able Danger, but that's okay because it probably wasn't important. The SEC destroyed their records on the investigation into the insider trading before the attacks, but that's okay because destroying the records of the largest investigation in SEC history is just part of routine record keeping. NIST has classified the data that they used for their model of WTC-7's collapse, but that's okay because knowing how they made their model of the collapse would jeopardize public safety. The FBI has argued that all material related to their investigation of 9/11 should be kept secret from the public, but that's okay because the FBI probably has nothing to hide. This man never existed, nor is anything he had to say worthy of your attention, and if you say otherwise, you are a paranoid conspiracy theorist and deserve to be shunned by all of humanity. Likewise him, and her. And her, and her, and him. Osama bin Laden lived in a cave fortress in the hills of Afghanistan, but somehow got away. Then he was hiding out in Tora Bora, but somehow got away. Then he lived in Abbottabad for years, taunting the most comprehensive intelligence dragnet employing the most sophisticated technology in the history of the world for a decade, releasing video after video with complete impunity and getting younger and younger as he did so, before finally being found in a daring SEAL team raid which wasn't recorded on video, in which he didn't resist or use his wife as a human shield, and in which these crack special forces operatives panicked and killed this unarmed man, supposedly the best source of intelligence about those dastardly terrorists on the entire planet. Then they dumped his body in the ocean before telling anyone about it. Then a couple dozen of that team's members died in a helicopter crash in Afghanistan. This is the story of 9/11, brought to you by the media which told you the hard truths about
his head could be seen to move violently forward.
And
they took the babies out of the incubators.
And
mobile production facilities.
And
the rescue of Jessica Lynch.
If you have any questions about this story, you are a batshit paranoid tinfoil dog-abusing baby hater and will be reviled by everyone. If you love your country and or freedom, happiness, rainbows, rock and roll, puppy dogs, apple pie, and your grandma, you will never ever express doubts about any part of this story to anyone. Ever. After stepping down as mayor of New York City, Rudy Giuliani tried to launch himself as a national political leader on the back of the single defining event of his career.
September 11th, September 11th. Terrorists or terrorism, September 11th. The flames of hell emanating from those buildings. September 11, fallen towers of the World Trade Center. Terrorists, September 11, 2001.
In the end, he failed miserably, with voters immediately seeing his ploy for what it was: base political pandering.
9/11 was bad.
I agree with that.
God, I can't believe how easy this is.
But what many do not realize is that Giuliani's case is not just that of another ghoulish politician parading on the corpses of those who died on his watch for his own political gain. On the day of 9/11, while the remains of the Twin Towers and World Trade Center 7 were still smoldering, one of Mayor Giuliani's first concerns was clearing away the evidence from the crime scene.
We were able to move 120 dump trucks out of the city last night, which will give you a sense of the work that was done overnight.
It's wild out here. They just keep coming. Look. It doesn't stop. There's more. I keep thinking it's at the end, and it's not.
Despite reassurances that the rapid removal of the evidence from Ground Zero was important for emergency access, this process went far beyond merely clearing a path for rescue workers. As Eric Lawyer, founder of Firefighters for 9/11 Truth, points out, the massive operation to haul away over 1.5 million tons of debris and to sell much of the steel to Chinese firm Baosteel at discount prices was not just an overzealous approach to clearing the area, but was itself a crime.
9/11 was the greatest loss of life and property damage in U.S. fire history. This should have been the most protected, preserved, over-tested, and thorough investigation of a crime scene in world history. Sadly, it was not. What was it? Well, we know from their own admission, the majority of the evidence was destroyed. Like Richard said, 22 years of experience. I've seen a lot of crime scenes. I've never seen anything like this in my life. I was out at the site. I saw trucks leaving faster than anywhere I've ever seen, but I accepted it at the time, and for years I accepted it because it was a recovery and rescue operation, and that's normal to have something like that going. Again, we'd never seen anything like it, but that was expected. What I didn't know for years, what was going on behind the scenes, was that evidence was being destroyed when it was shipped off. By their own admission, Tower 7 investigation, this investigation at Tower 7 had no physical evidence. How do you investigate a crime when you've destroyed all the evidence? It doesn't make sense. They also admit that they refused to test the explosives or to test for explosives or residue of thermite. Now, this is what I'm going to go into here just real quickly, is there are national standards for an investigation. That's what all of us are asking for, an investigation that follows national standards and holds people accountable.
Needless to say, an investigation of the 9/11 crime scene following the National Investigation Standards has never been conducted and never will be, as Giuliani oversaw the illegal destruction of the evidence itself. To add insult to this injury, in 2003, New York City medical examiner Charles Hirsch revealed that in the mad scramble to get rid of the crime scene evidence, human remains from the World Trade Center had been left at the Fresh Kills landfill, where the debris was sorted and the steel was sold. In 2007, Eric Beck, a senior supervisor of the recycling facility that sifted the debris, admitted that some of those human remains ended up in a mixture that was used to pave roads and fill potholes in New York City. But as grotesque as such revelations are, they are not the most shocking part of Giuliani's 9/11 story. In the late 1990s, the mayor oversaw the creation of a state-of-the-art $13 million emergency command center to coordinate the city's disaster recovery and response efforts. Located on the 23rd floor of World Trade Center Building 7, just across Vesey Street from the Twin Towers, the center, dubbed by local press at the time as Giuliani's Bunker, included reinforced, bulletproof, and bomb-resistant walls, its own air supply and water tank, beds, showers to accommodate 30 people, and 3 backup generators. It could be used to monitor all of New York's emergency communications frequencies and was staffed 24 hours a day. And yet, remarkably, on the morning of 9/11, neither Mayor Giuliani nor any other city personnel or police or fire department officials were in the bunker after the Twin Tower strikes.
As I told you guys before, it's very,
was very funny. I was on my way to work, and traffic was excellent. I received a call that a small Cessna had hit the World Trade Center, and I was asked to go and man the Office of Emergency Management. Upon arriving into the OEM EOC, we noticed that everybody was gone. I saw coffee that was on the desk. Still, the smoke was still coming off the coffee. I saw half-eaten sandwiches.
So why wasn't the mayor and the city's emergency personnel in the location that had been purpose-built for just such an event? According to Giuliani, they had been told to evacuate because they had been given a warning that the Twin Towers were going to collapse. A warning that was evidently not passed on to any of the emergency personnel that were still working in the buildings.
I went down to the scene and we set up headquarters at 75 Barclay Street, which was right there with the police commissioner, the fire commissioner, the head of emergency management. And we were operating out of there when we were told that the World Trade Center was going to collapse. And it did collapse before we could actually get out of the building. So we were trapped in the building for 10, 15 minutes and finally found an exit and got out, walked north, and took a lot of people with us.
Giuliani, in his own words, has admitted that he was warned that the World Trade Center was going to collapse. This despite the fact that there was no possible way for this to be predicted in the first hour of the unfolding disaster. Even more incredibly, despite being given this warning, no effort was made to pass it on to the police, firefighters, and other responders who were still working in and around the buildings. When precisely was this warning given, and by whom? Why, despite acting on this warning himself, did Giuliani make no effort to pass the warning on to others? Predictably, when confronted with these questions by activists during his 2008 presidential campaign, Giuliani merely smiled and denied that he had ever received such a warning.
You reported to Peter Jennings that on 9/11 that the World Trade, the towers were going to collapse, and excuse me, no steel structure in history has ever collapsed due to a fire. How come the people in the buildings weren't notified, and who else knew about this, and how do you sleep at night?
Ma'am, I didn't know that the towers were going to collapse. You reported
And also, no.
You said on Peter Jennings on ABC
and
video,
also,
you indeed said that the towers, you were notified the towers were going to collapse while you were in some, not sure exactly where you were prior to, but you said on ABC video with Peter Jennings in an interview that you were aware that towers were going to collapse in advance. We'd like to know who told you the towers were going to collapse in advance, sir, and also we'd like to know who else you told.
Well, the fact is that I didn't realize the towers would collapse. I never realized that.
So where was the mayor on 9/11? On Pier 92, which was already set up as a functional command center due to a full-scale emergency drill by FEMA that, by a remarkable coincidence, had been scheduled for the following day.
And we selected Pier 92 as our command center. And the reason Pier 92 was selected as the command center was because on the next day, on September 12th, Pier 92 was going to have a drill. It had hundreds of people here, from FEMA, from the federal government, from the state emergency management office, and they were getting ready for a drill for biochemical attack. So that was going to be the place they were going to have the drill. The equipment was already there. So we were able to establish a command center there within 3 days that was 2.5 to 3 times bigger than the command center that we had lost at 7 World Trade Center. And it was from there that the rest of the search and rescue effort was completed.
Mayor Giuliani oversaw the illegal destruction of the 9/11 crime scene and is criminally liable for the deaths of hundreds of emergency workers for not passing on prior warnings about the collapses of the Twin Towers. It is no wonder, then, that the fire department of New York so passionately detests Giuliani for his actions in disgracing their fallen brothers and covering up the 9/11 crime.
Rudy Giuliani has used the horrible events of September 11, 2001, to create a carefully crafted persona. But the fact is, what Rudy portrays is not a full picture of the decisions made that led, in our view, to the unnecessary deaths of our FDNY members and the attempt to stop the dignified recovery of those lost. The urban legend of America's mayor needs to be balanced by the truth.
So what is the reward for Giuliani's criminal actions on 9/11? An offer to become the head of the Department of Homeland Security in the event of a Trump presidency, of course. This is the state of American politics, and this is precisely why a true investigation of what happened on 9/11 never has, and never will, be conducted by the US government itself. The Dust Lady photo has become one of the iconic images of 9/11. The image of a woman, shocked and disoriented, completely covered in dust from the demolition of the Twin Towers, brings the nearly incomprehensible events of that day down to a human scale. But of course the Dust Lady was not the only one to feel the effects of the blanket of dust that descended on Manhattan after the towers fell. In the hours, days, and weeks that followed, thousands upon thousands of victims, first responders, emergency personnel, cleanup crews, and residents were subjected to the poisonous stew of asbestos, benzene, mercury, lead, cadmium, and other particulates, from which many are now dying.
Dr. David Prezant, Chief Medical Officer with the New York Fire Department, spent 7 years examining more than 10,000 firefighters, those who were at the World Trade Center site after 9/11 and those who weren't.
And we found an increase in all cancers combined, a 19% increase in cancers compared to the non-exposed World Trade Center group.
Talk about the most pressing medical issues facing 9/11 first responders right now.
Cancer. In the beginning, in the first few years, it was respiratory, but now it's cancers. And this is just the first wave of cancers, the blood cancers, the leukemias, the organ cancers. But in 5 or 10 more years, you're going to see the asbestos cancers. There'll be another wave of cancers. And like I tell everybody, this is a generation-long issue and a generation-long illness.
Every morning I wake up, I got to take 33 pills within the course of the day. At 47 years old, I have lungs of an 80-year-old man that would have been a smoker. People say you have to forget about 9/11. And I say, how could I forget about 9/11 when every morning I got to take this medication and walk around with an oxygen tank?
If the brave men and women who had rushed to the World Trade Center in the chaotic days after 9/11 to help with the search and rescue had done so knowing the risks they were facing, that would be one thing. But of course they did not. They had been given false assurances by Christine Todd Whitman, the EPA administrator who assured the public just days into the cleanup that the air was safe to breathe.
You know asbestos was in there, is in those buildings, lead is in those buildings. There are the VOCs. However, the concentrations are such that they don't pose a health hazard.
As the weeks and months dragged on, Whitman, the EPA, and its officials made statement after statement after statement reaffirming that contaminant levels were low or non-existent, and that the air quality in Manhattan posed no public health concern. We now know that these reassurances were outright lies. On September 18th, the very same day that Whitman and the EPA were encouraging New Yorkers to return to work, the agency detected sulfur dioxide levels in the air so high that, according to one industrial hygienist, they exceeded the EPA's standard for a classification of hazardous. By that time, first responders were already reporting a range of health problems, including coughing, wheezing, eye irritation, and headaches. The evidence continued to pour in that there were serious health concerns for those in and around Manhattan, but the information was suppressed almost as quickly as it was discovered. When a local lab tested dust samples from near the World Trade Center site and found dangerous concentrations of fiberglass and asbestos, the New York State Department of Health warned local labs that they would lose their licenses if they process any more independent sampling. When U.S. Geological Survey scientists began performing tests on their own dust samples, they were shocked at the alphabet soup of heavy metals they found in it. They forwarded this information to the EPA, but the agency continued to assure the public that there was no evidence of long-term health risks. The drama continued to unfold as information poured in about benzene, lead, and other environmental toxins. Yet on September 18th, the EPA specifically advised the public against wearing respirators outside the World Trade Center restricted area. Then, just 2 weeks later, the agency distributed respirators to their own staffers at the EPA's Region 2 building on Broadway Street. As scientists, industrial hygienists, and even other government officials began to accuse the EPA of covering up the true extent of the problem in New York, the agency continued with its dogged assertion that the air was safe to breathe. It wasn't until 2003 that the EPA's own Inspector General revealed that the White House had been editing the agency's press releases all along, finding that the White House Council on Environmental Quality influenced, through the collaboration process, the information that EPA communicated to the public through its early press releases when it convinced EPA to add reassuring statements and delete cautionary ones. When new documents were released to the public in 2011, on the eve of the 10th anniversary of 9/11, it was discovered that this editing was even worse than originally feared.
There were clear warnings, specifically on Water Street, which for those people in this area know is not far from Wall Street, that showed that the levels of contaminants in the air were too high for people to go back. That was removed, which was bad enough, and then replaced with a recommendation that people go back to work. They were urged to go back, even though the early samples were showing that there were high levels of contaminants.
And you point out also that in many cases they were telling people it was safe before they had even finished conducting initial tests.
In one email exchange that happens on the 13th, so it's just a day and a half later, the people in Washington at the White House Council on Environmental Quality are telling the people up here, hey, Christine Whitman is coming up. She's going to talk to reporters because all the results so far have been so positive. Well, all the results so far showed almost nothing because there were almost no results. And yet they were committed to this message of reassurance despite the facts, and that's not the way it should happen.
Outraged at the fact that they had been lied to and their lives put at risk, residents and workers in Lower Manhattan and Brooklyn sued Whitman and the EPA in 2004. In a 2006 ruling allowing the class action lawsuit to proceed, Judge Deborah A. Batts of Federal District Court in Manhattan excoriated Whitman, finding that her baseless assurances that the air was safe increased and may have in fact created the danger to people living and working in the area. Ruling that the EPA did, in fact, make misleading statements of safety about the air quality, Judge Batts said, "The allegations in this case of Whitman's reassuring and misleading statements of safety after the September 11, 2001 attacks are without question conscience-shocking." Batts's decision was overturned by a panel of judges in 2008, who ruled that misleading the public and contributing to the health problems and deaths of untold Ground Zero workers was not conscience-shocking enough to override her immunity from prosecution as a federal agent. If Whitman has a conscience at all, it is evidently not shocked by any of these accusations. She has not only never conceded guilt or even expressed sorrow for the ongoing sickness and deaths that her actions helped bring about, she has repeatedly defended the actions of herself and the EPA in general.
Statements that EPA officials made after 9/11 were based on the judgment of experienced environmental and health professionals at EPA, OSHA, and the CDC, who had analyzed the test data that 13 different organizations and agencies were collecting in Lower Manhattan. I do not recall any EPA scientist or experts responsible for reviewing this data ever advising me that the test data from Lower Manhattan showed that the air or water proposed long-term health risks for the general public.
Whitman's lies are not just those of another self-serving politician looking to save their job or stay out of jail. They are the lies of someone who has contributed to the deteriorating health and even the death of thousands of innocent men and women. For the victims of Christine Todd Whitman, the EPA, the White House Council on Environmental Quality, and all of the other agencies and officers who lied to the public about the health risks in New York, 9/11 is not a single day of horror that occurred a decade and a half ago. It is a slowly unfolding nightmare, one that every day brings them one step closer to their grave. The Dust Lady is one of the icons of the tragedy of that day. Should it be any surprise, then, that she too was ravaged by 9/11 related diseases and ultimately died of cancer last year? She was not the first person to die from the aftermath of 9/11. And, thanks to Christine Todd Whitman and the liars at the EPA who have consigned untold thousands to a similar fate, she will not be the last.
My name's David Miller. On September 11th, 2001, along with hundreds of my fellow troops, I went to Ground Zero. No one asked us, no orders were given. We went because our city, our country, our neighbors were under attack. And we knew what to do, or at least we thought we did. On September 13th, we marched back in groups of 2s and 3s at first, and then dozens until there must have been more than 200 of us, carrying ropes, ladders, tools of every kind, back into the smoke and the poison and rubble, where we reached an intersection with hundreds of civilians cheering us on. Our uniforms were torn and soiled. Our resolve was simple: to stay and dig as long as we had any hope to save anybody. I want to tell you about how sick so many of these brave men and women have become. I want to tell you about how the mayor refused to accept the fact that not dozens, not hundreds, but many thousands of us were contaminated, sickened, and poisoned by the most toxic combinations of building materials in the history of disaster relief. And that for 5 terrible years, he ignored that fact. 5 years of our family members watching us drop dead. And every time Popular Mechanics calls the people of this movement nuts, these propagandists, professional liars and tools who cannot even by any stretch of the imagination be considered journalists, strike another nail into the coffin of another rescue worker.
A 21-year veteran of the CIA, Robert Baer is billed as one of America's most elite intelligence case officers. Having worked field assignments in Lebanon, Sudan, Morocco, Iraq, and other international hotspots, he was praised by Pulitzer Prize-winning investigative journalist Seymour Hersh as perhaps the best on-the-ground field officer in the Middle East. He has written multiple books based on his experiences with the agency. He has worked as a consultant on documentary and television projects. He regularly appears as a commentator on CNN and other news outlets, and he writes a regular column on intelligence matters for Time. George Clooney's character in Syriana, Bob Barnes, is based on Baer and his experiences with the CIA.
And 90% of what's left is in the Middle East. This is a fight to the death.
I think we've got something that utilizes your specific skill set.
His money's in a lot of dark corners.
I want you to take him from his hotel, drug him, put him in the front of a car, and run a truck into him at 50 miles an hour.
It's good to have you back in town, Bob.
Robert Baer retired from the CIA in 1997 and received the agency's Career Intelligence Medal the following year. In short, he is a serious and well-respected career intelligence official. All of this makes it particularly stunning that in 2008, he told a team of citizen journalists in Los Angeles that he knew a man who cashed out the day before 9/11.
Last thing I believe he was his National Reconnaissance Office who was running a drill. A plane crashed into their building, and you know they're staffed by DOD and CIA.
I know the guy that went into his broker in San Diego and said, "Cash me out. It's going down tomorrow."
Really?
Yeah.
That tells us something.
What?
That tells us something.
Well, his brother worked in the White House.
Given Robert Baer's experience and training, it is difficult to comprehend just how significant the information that he just casually admits here really is. we are left with only two possibilities. Either Baer is lying, or he has direct knowledge of someone whose brother worked at the White House who had foreknowledge of the 9/11 plot. There is no middle ground here. The man Robert Baer claims to know is at least an accessory before the fact to the crimes of 9/11, if not an actual accomplice or co-conspirator in those crimes. By failing to report this information to the investigative authorities, Baer leaves himself open to being an accessory after the fact to those same crimes. Title 18, Section 3 of the U.S. Code defines the criteria for an accessory after the fact to a crime committed against the United States. Whoever, knowing that an offense against the United States has been committed, receives, relieves, comforts, or assists the offender in order to hinder or prevent his apprehension, trial, or punishment, is an accessory after the fact. Given the exceptionally grave nature of this admission and its repercussions, one would suppose that Baer has been questioned by other media and/or the FBI and made to discuss in detail precisely who it was who cashed out and how he knew about the 9/11 plot in advance. But one would be wrong. Since making this stunning admission to the cameras of We Are Change Los Angeles, no one has ever asked Baer for more information about the case. So what does Robert Baer say about the possibility of a 9/11 inside job? In 2007, writing about the CIA's admission that they illegally destroyed the videotaped interrogations of high-profile terror suspects, Baer said, "I myself have felt the pull of the conspiracy theorists who believe that 9/11 was an inside job, somehow pulled off by the US government. For the record, I don't believe that the World Trade Center was brought down by our own explosives, or that a rocket, rather than an airliner, hit the Pentagon. I spent a career in the CIA trying to orchestrate plots, wasn't all that good at it, and certainly couldn't carry off 9/11. Nor could the real pros I had the pleasure to work with." But just 1 year before, he gave a very different answer to Thomas Hartman on his radio show.
So are you just, personally of the opinion, I mean, not obviously you can't speak for the CIA or your previous activities with the agency, but are you of the opinion that there was an aspect of inside job to 9/11 within the U.S. government?
There's that possibility. The evidence points at it.
And why is it not being investigated?
Why isn't the WMD story being investigated? Why isn't anybody been held accountable for 9/11? We held people accountable after Pearl Harbor. I mean, why has there been no change of command? Why has there been no political repercussions? Why has there been no any sort of exposure on this? It really makes you wonder.
So why is Robert Baer hiding the identity of a 9/11 accomplice or co-conspirator? And will the FBI be asking him for details of this story anytime soon? Until the American public shows some interest in this shocking admission, it is unlikely that anything will happen.
Last thing I would leave you with is National Reconnaissance Office was running a drill, a plane crashed into their building, and they're staffed by DOD and CIA.
I know the guy that went into his broker in San Diego and said, "Cash me out, it's going down tomorrow."
Really?
Yeah.
That tells us something.
What?
That tells us something.
Well, his brother worked in the White House. There we go.
According to the official story of September 11th, 2001, 4 hijacked airliners flew wildly off course over the most sensitive airspace in the United States for 109 minutes without being intercepted by a single fighter jet. As Commander-in-Chief of the North American Aerospace Defense Command on 9/11, General Ralph Eberhart was in charge of the largest failure to defend North American airspace in history. Rather than accepting blame for his command's complete lack of response that morning, however, or even expressing regret about what had occurred, General Eberhart instead spent the rest of his career attempting to pin the blame for this failure squarely on the FAA.
You've read a lot over the last 2.5 years about what NORAD did and did not do that morning and should have done in the years and months leading up to that attack. Ground truth is that NORAD was charged to support the FAA in the event of a hijacking. Our role was to respond to the request from FAA to get airborne, fly, shadow the hijacked airplane, say whether the hijacked airplane was following the instructions of the air traffic controller of FAA, and in a terrible situation that airplane crashed or that airplane exploded in midair, document that tragedy.
Although Eberhardt's version of events was cemented into place as the official story of 9/11 propounded by the 9/11 Commission, they are in fact self-serving lies. In Eberhardt's version of events, NORAD is completely subordinate to the FAA. In reality, however, NORAD is specifically tasked with dealing with such events itself, not waiting passively for FAA orders. NORAD's own regulations for dealing with hijacked jets specifically state that FAA authorization for interceptor operations is not used for intercept and airborne surveillance of hijacked aircraft within the continental United States. These standard operating procedures were not merely theoretical or some obscure regulation that would have been unfamiliar to the four-star general in charge of defending American airspace. In the year 2000 alone, NORAD scrambled fighters in response to unknowns, pilots who didn't file or diverted from flight plans or used the wrong frequency, 129 times. Perhaps even more remarkable, however, is that Eberhardt and NORAD offered not one, not two, not three, but 4 separate timelines of their complete lack of response that morning. The first, offered by Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff Richard Myers just 2 days after the attacks during his confirmation hearings in the Senate, claimed that not a single fighter was scrambled to intercept any of the airliners until after the incident at the Pentagon. 1 week later, NORAD released a partial timeline that indicated they had in fact received advance notification about 3 of the planes with as much as 20 minutes warning, more than enough time for the planes to have been intercepted. A third story emerged in May 2003. This time, NORAD was only contacted about Flight 175 at 9:05 a.m., 3 minutes after it crashed into the South Tower. The official story, found in the 9/11 Commission's final report, was that NORAD received no advance notice of any of the flights. Eberhardt and the military were completely exonerated. However, Eberhardt had testified in October 2001 that NORAD had been notified about Flight 77 at 9:24 a.m. The 9/11 Commission determined that this was a lie. Regardless of the truth or untruth of any of these accounts, the simple fact is that, according to the 9/11 Commission itself, Eberhardt had lied to Congress, which is in fact a crime. By the 9/11 Commission's own account, Eberhardt should have been tried. But Eberhardt's lies do not end there.
Many people will talk about that they knew that there was going to be an attack. They knew that people were going to take over an aircraft and fly it into a building. I can tell you that there was no credible intelligence at that time to go build a defense against that type of attack. Tragically, we were wrong. We were wrong.
Once again, Eberhardt's depiction of events is a self-serving and easily demonstrable lie. Not only had NORAD envisioned such a scenario, they had been training for it extensively in the years leading up to 9/11. Between October 1998 and September 2001, NORAD had conducted 28 exercise events involving hijackings. At least 5 of those hijack scenarios involved a suicide crash into a high-value target. Furthermore, at least 6 of the exercises took place completely within American airspace, putting to rest the oft-heard excuse that NORAD wasn't prepared for threats from within the U.S. Another note that would be of interest to prosecutors looking at potential foreknowledge of the 9/11 attacks pertains to Eberhardt's dual role as Commander-in-Chief of U.S. Space Command, where he was responsible for setting something called the Infocon threat level. Established in March 1999, the Infocon threat level was designed as a measure of the threat to Defense Department computer systems and networks, and different levels required different protocols for securing communications and information systems. At 9:09 p.m. on September 10, 2001, less than 12 hours before the attacks began, Eberhardt reduced Infocon to level 5, the lowest threat level, making it easier for hackers to compromise Defense Department systems and controls. Eberhardt has never been asked about this change in the public record. There are a laundry list of other questionable actions that Eberhardt took on 9/11. His failure to implement military control over U.S. airspace. His decision to drive from Peterson Air Force Base to NORAD's Cheyenne Mountain Control Center at 9:30 a.m., right in the middle of the attacks, despite knowing this would involve loss of communication for part of the drive, and the fact that it took him 45 minutes to complete the 30-minute trip. His decision to ground all fighter jets by ordering them to battle stations instead of ordering them to scramble at 9:49 a.m., and even NORAD's inability to turn over basic documentation to government investigators. The official story of 9/11 is a lie, but Eberhardt's story is a lie within that lie, designed to absolve himself and other members of the U.S. military charged with American airspace that morning from the most catastrophic failure in that mission in their history. And not only did Eberhardt survive with his career intact, he was praised as a 9/11 hero and moved into the private sector after leaving NORAD in 2004, as chairman and board member of a number of companies that directly benefited from the post-9/11 police state and the post-9/11 war on terror. Ralph E. Eberhardt remains at large.
We have a problem here. We have a hijacked aircraft headed towards New York.
Is this real world or exercise?
It took President Bush an extraordinary 441 days after 9/11 to establish a commission to investigate the events of September 11, 2001. And it was not just the case that Bush was slow in acting. He actively resisted any investigation for as long as he could, taking the extraordinary and unprecedented step of personally asking Senate Majority Leader Tom Daschle to limit Congress's investigation into those events. In the end, the commission was severely underfunded, severely rushed, and, as Commission Chairman Thomas Kean later admitted,
"We think the commission in many ways was set up to fail."
But the most unmistakable sign that Bush was only interested in appointing a cover-up commission to investigate the largest attack on U.S. soil in modern history was his initial choice for commission chairman.
Today I'm pleased to announce my choice for commission chairman, Dr. Henry Kissinger.
Concerns about once the commission begins its work, if fingers point to valuable allies, say Saudi Arabia, for example, the implications, the policy implications this could have to the United States, particularly at this delicate time?
I have been given every assurance by the President that we should go where the facts lead us.
Not even the New York Times could believe that Henry Kissinger, the consummate Washington insider, could pretend to conduct an independent fact-finding investigation into 9/11. It is tempting to wonder if the choice of Mr. Kissinger is not a clever maneuver by the White House to contain an investigation it long opposed, the Times editorialized after the announcement. Kissinger may have been prepared for such polite disagreement with his appointment, but he was not prepared to meet the 9/11 widows whose tireless efforts had forced the creation of the commission in the first place.
Several family members approached Kissinger and requested a meeting at his office in New York. Prior to the meeting, Kristen Breitweiser conducted a thorough investigation of Kissinger's potential conflicts of interest.
Probably much to the chagrin of some of the people in the room, Lori asked some very pointed questions. Would you have any Saudi American clients that you would like to tell us about? And he was very uncomfortable, kind of twisting and turning on the couch. And then she asked whether he had any clients by the name of Bin Laden. And he just about fell off his couch.
Former Secretary of State Henry Kissinger stepped down from the position Friday.
We thought the meeting went well.
Kissinger was dethroned, and the commission went ahead under Chairman Thomas Kean and Vice Chair Lee Hamilton. But while Kissinger's appointment and resignation received all the attention, the White House was busy slipping another agent into the commission through the back door. In January of 2003, just weeks after Kissinger stepped down, it was quietly announced that Philip D. Zelikow would take on the role of executive director. As executive director, Zelikow picked the areas of investigation, the briefing materials, the topics for hearings, the witnesses, and the lines of questioning for witnesses. In effect, this was the man in charge of running the investigation itself. So who was Philip Zelikow? The Commission's press release announcing his position described him as a man of high stature who has distinguished himself as an academician, lawyer, author, and public servant. Although they noted his position at the University of Virginia and his previous role as executive director for the National Commission on Federal Electoral Reform, curiously missing from this brief bio are the multiple conflicts of interest that show how the Bush administration essentially put one of its own in charge of investigating how the Bush administration failed on 9/11. In 1995, Zelikow co-authored a book with Bush's national security advisor, Condoleezza Rice. He was part of the transition team that helped the Bush administration take over the White House from the Clinton administration. He was even a member of Bush's post-9/11 Foreign Intelligence Advisory Board. But perhaps most incredibly, Zelikow actually authored the Bush administration's 2002 national security strategy that outlined the preemptive war doctrine that would be used against Iraq. This, however, is something that not even 9/11 Commissioners Kane or Hamilton themselves knew at the time the commission was formed.
Zelikow was the author of a very important document issued by the White House in September 2002 that really turned military doctrine on its head and said that the United States could become involved in preemptive war, preemptive defense, that we could attack a nation that didn't pose an immediate military threat to this country. And obviously in September 2002, it sure appeared that that document was being written with one target in mind, Iraq. Now, as I say, the author of the document at the time was anonymous. We didn't know that Philip Zelikow had written this thing. And that becomes known, I think, widely on the staff only in the final months of the 9/11 Commission investigation. And it appeared to pose yet another conflict of interest for Zelikow.
Just to be clear, the preemptive doctrine memo comes out in September of 2002. The commission is created formally in
December 2002.
And do Kane and Hamilton, when they hire Zelikow, are they aware of his role as the author of the preemptive doctrine?
I don't believe so.
These conflicts of interest were not merely theoretical. After the victims' family members discovered Zelikow's links to the Bush administration, he was forced to recuse himself from the proceedings of the commission, which he himself was directing, that had to do with the Bush White House transition or the National Security Council. Hearing of Zelikow's appointment, former counterterrorism czar Richard Clarke, who Zelikow helped to demote during the Bush transition, remarked that the fix is in, wondering aloud, could anyone have a more obvious conflict of interest than Zelikow? Key staffers and even one of the commissioners threatened to quit the commission altogether when learning of Zelikow's history. When the 9/11 victims' family members discovered Zelikow's links, they protested his appointment. But unlike with Kissinger, this time their concerns were dismissed, and Zelikow plowed ahead. As even Zelikow himself admits, his ties to the very figures he was supposedly investigating are a legitimate concern, and any real investigation of the 9/11 cover-up would begin with him.
There's a whole welter of conspiracy theories about 9/11 floating around the internet, in video cassettes, and there's a whole cottage industry in this, which if you haven't read much about it, then you're a fortunate person. I get a lot of this. I actually figure very largely in a number of the key conspiracy theories. But be fair, I worked with Condi Rice, right? I worked with her in the administration of Bush 41. So I could be read as the plausible henchman executing the cover-up. And it's a legitimate concern, especially if I hadn't had 81 other staffers keeping their eagle eye on me.
Conveniently left out of Zelikow's story about the 81 staffers keeping their eye on his decisions is that they were staffers who were hired by him and under his complete control. In fact, Zelikow took over the hiring of the commission staff and even stopped staffers from communicating directly with the commissioners themselves. In the first few months, the 9/11 commissioners themselves rarely even visited the commission because Zelikow denied them their own offices or the ability to hire their own staffers. The most remarkable example of Zelikow's dictatorial control came in March 2003, just 3 months after the commission's 16-month investigation began. It was at that time, before the commission had even convened a single hearing, that Zelikow, along with longtime associate and commission consultant Ernest May, co-wrote a complete outline of the final report.
Before the staff even had its first meeting, Zelikow had written, along with his former professor Ernest May, a detailed outline of the commission's report, complete, as Sheenan put it, with chapter headings, subheadings, and sub-subheadings. When Kane and Hamilton were later shown this outline, they worried that it would be seen as evidence that the report's outcome had been predetermined. So the three of them decided to keep it a secret from the rest of the staff. When the staff did finally learn about this outline a year later, they were alarmed. Some of them circulated a parody entitled The Warren Commission Report Preemptive Outline. One of its chapter headings read, "Single bullet, we haven't seen the evidence yet, but really, we're sure." The implication was that the crucial chapter in the Zelikow-May outline could have been headed Osama bin Laden and Al-Qaeda. We haven't seen the evidence yet, but really, we're sure.
So what exactly did Zelikow do as executive director? He allowed information in the commission's final report derived from illegal CIA torture sessions, despite not having access to the evidence of those sessions themselves, which were later illegally destroyed. This included the testimony of alleged 9/11 mastermind Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, who was waterboarded 183 times in a single month, whose children were kidnapped by the CIA, who was told that his children were going to be tortured with insects, and who eventually confessed to a whole series of plots, including bombing a bank that didn't exist at the time he was arrested. More than 1/4 of the footnotes in the final commission report source from this torture testimony, and as Zelikow himself admitted, quite a bit, if not most, of the commission's information on the 9/11 plot itself came from this testimony. Zelikow denied interviews and documents to staffers investigating the Saudi connection to the attacks, eventually firing one of them and removing the text of their investigation from the final report. He personally rewrote a commission staff statement to suggest a systematic link between Al-Qaeda and Iraq before 9/11, outraging the authors of the original statement. He worked behind his own staffers' back to stop them from serving the Pentagon a subpoena to answer about information NORAD was withholding from the commission. He sat on a proposal to open a criminal investigation into FAA and military officials who lied to the commission for months, and then forwarded that proposal not to the Justice Department, who could have brought criminal charges, but to the Inspector General, who could not. And he covered up information on Able Danger, a military intelligence team that had identified several of the alleged 9/11 hijackers in the country before 9/11.
After the initial disclosure, Dr. Zelikow came to me at the end of the meeting, gave me his card and said, "What you said today is critically important, very important. Please come see me when we return to Washington, D.C." I returned to Washington, D.C., January of 2004, call in, they say, "We want to see you, stand by." Nothing happens. A week goes by. I call again. They say, "We don't need you to come in. We have all the information on Able Danger we need. Thank you anyway." And that was where it ended.
All right, so the information that you told Dr. Zelikow in Afghanistan about the CIA interfering with your ability to provide actionable intelligence to the United States government, intelligence that might have helped them find out who caused 9/11, you were not permitted to testify about.
That's correct.
Okay.
From the initial outline to the final report, Zelikow carefully guided the process, hiring and firing the staff, directing their research efforts, deciding on witnesses, scrubbing information, and shielding his former colleagues in the White House from criticism. But perhaps more remarkable than the fact that the fix was in from the moment he took over the commission and began working on the predictive outline of the final report, is that he had in fact written about 9/11 and its eventual aftermath in 1998, 3 years before September 11th. In an article entitled Catastrophic Terrorism, Tackling the New Danger, written for the Council on Foreign Relations Foreign Affairs in November 1998, Zelikow and co-authors Ashton Carter and John Deutsch ask readers to imagine a catastrophic act of terrorism like the destruction of the World Trade Center. Like Pearl Harbor, the event would divide our past and future into a before and after. The United States might respond with draconian measures scaling back civil liberties, allowing wider surveillance of citizens, detention of suspects, and use of deadly force. More violence could follow, either future terrorist attacks or U.S. counterattacks. Belatedly, Americans would judge their leaders negligent for not addressing terrorism more urgently. Zelikow's amazing prediction becomes somewhat less remarkable when we learn his own self-described expertise in the creation and management of public myth. In a separate 1998 article on public myths, Zelikow identifies generational myths that are formed by those pivotal events that become etched in the minds of those who have lived through them, before noting that the current set of public myths, formed during the New Deal in 1933, are currently fading. Convenient for Zelikow, then, that the Pearl Harbor event that would define the next generational myth, known as the War on Terror, would arrive just 3 years later, and that he would be in charge of the commission tasked with creating and managing the public perception of that myth. Indeed, given his central role in the cover-up of 9/11 and deflecting concern away from legitimate 9/11 suspects, any true investigation into the events of September 11th would involve a thorough interrogation of Philip D. Zelikow.
No, but to be fair, I worked with Condi Rice, right? I worked with her in the administration of Bush 41. So, I could be read as the plausible henchman executing the cover-up. And it's a legitimate concern.
Some evil is just, it can't be explained.
Are these people happy? Are they joyous now? Are they celebrating?
Oh, absolutely. They're
Thank
celebrating.
God.
There's one report, this has not been confirmed, but there's several live reports that there was a cell, one of these cells, across the Hudson River. And they got on this is the report, I emphasize, I don't know this for a fact, but there's several witnesses who say this happened. They got on the roof of the building to look across. They knew what was going to happen. Yeah. They were waiting for it to happen, and when it happened, they celebrated. They jumped for joy.
In the days after 9/11, while Ground Zero continued to smolder, millions heard Dan Rather and various media outlets repeat vague and unconfirmed reports of arrests that took place that day. These rumors held that Middle Eastern men, presumably Arabs, were arrested in explosive-packed vans in various places around the city on September 11th, and that some had even been photographing and celebrating those events. What most do not realize is that those reports were not mere rumors, and we now have thousands of pages of FBI, CIA, and DOJ reports documenting those arrests.
My binoculars, and I could see the towers from my window, and this is where I'm looking, and all of a sudden, down there, I see this van parked. And I see 3 guys on top of the van, and I could see that they were like happy. They didn't look shocked to me. They didn't look shocked.
The men were spotted shortly after 8:46 a.m., yet somehow at this early stage, just minutes after the first plane strike on the World Trade Center, they were already positioned in a parking lot in Liberty State Park, taking pictures of the towers and celebrating. They left the scene shortly after being spotted, and at 3:31 p.m. the FBI issued an all-points bulletin advising officers in the greater New York area to be on the lookout for a white 2000 Chevrolet van with Urban Moving Systems sign on back. At 3:56 p.m., the van was spotted traveling eastward on State Route 3 in New Jersey and pulled over by Officer Scott DiCarlo and Sergeant Dennis Ravelli of the East Rutherford Police Department. Inside they found 5 men: Sivan Kurzberg and his brother Paul, Yaron Schmel, Oded Elner, and Omar Marmari.
a major terrorist manhunt began. And just 6 hours after the attack, the van was stopped at a roadblock by patrolman Scott DiCarlo.
We were asked to detain the van and the passengers. They were just removed from the vehicle, patted down for safety precaution, and detained.
911 call at 410 Park.
I think once the FBI arrived, one of them stated that they were on our side, something to that effect.
According to the police report of the incident, Sivan Kurzberg told Officer DiCarlo, "We are Israeli. We are not your problem. Your problems are our problems. The Palestinians are the problem." Their official story: they were just Israeli tourists working for a moving company who had heard about the first World Trade Center strike and rushed to get a better view of the events.
They told interrogators they were working for Urban Moving, a shipping and storage firm run by an Israeli businessman who often employed Israeli students without work permits. The men say there was an innocent explanation for what was found in the van and their behavior on 9/11. They were, they say, simply on a working holiday.
We heard in the news that one of the plane was crashing down the building, and we thought it was an accident at the beginning. So we went up to the roof of Urban Moving, and we saw the building burning.
There is a better view from a building in Jersey that is up a hill, a straight line to the World Trade Center. We decided to go up there. It's like 2-3 minutes from the office. Stand over there and take some pictures. Everyone wants a picture like this in his camera.
Although this narrative is still trotted out when the story of the dancing Israelis is raised in the media, it is an easily demonstrable lie. FBI reports confirmed that the men were not taking somber pictures of a horrific event. When their 76 pictures were developed, they revealed the men had indeed been celebrating, smiling, hugging each other, and high-fiving. One of the pictures even featured Sivan Kurzberg holding a lighter up, with the burning tower in the background. And these were no ordinary tourists. Oded Elner had $4,700 stuffed into his sock. They lied to the police about where they had been that morning. They were carrying plane tickets for immediate departure to different places around the globe. The FBI confirmed that 2 of the men had ties to Israeli intelligence and came to suspect that they had indeed been on a mission for the Mossad. And of course, after returning to Israel, Elner claimed on national Israeli TV that they had been sent there to document the event.
And at that point we were taken for another round of questioning, this time related to our allegedly being members of Mossad. The fact of the matter is we are coming from a country that experiences terror daily. Our purpose was to document the event.
Their purpose was to document the event? But how could they possibly have known what event they were documenting at that point, before the second plane strike, when those few who even knew about the situation had assumed it to be an accident or pilot error? And when did they arrive at the parking lot to document the event anyway? The FBI reports show how the men gave confused and often conflicting accounts of when and how they learned about what was happening and when they arrived at the parking lot. Oded Elner even said they had arrived there shortly after 8 a.m., which would have been 45 minutes before the attacks even began. This is in line with one of the eyewitnesses that had placed their Urban Moving Systems van at the parking lot at 8 a.m. How could they have been in place and ready to document the event unless they knew what was about to happen? Any way you cut it, this story is unbelievable. Men with documented connections to Israeli intelligence and working in the United States without appropriate permits were detained after having been caught celebrating the attack on the World Trade Center at a time when no one knew that the WTC strike was an attack. So surely these men are locked behind bars to this day, right? Surely they were transferred to Guantanamo and held without trial for 15 years as part of the war on terror, weren't they? No. They were immediately transferred to federal custody, held for 71 days, and then deported back to Israel. The owner of the Urban Moving Systems company that had employed them, Dominic Suter, was investigated by the FBI too. They concluded that Urban Moving may have been providing cover for an Israeli intelligence operation, and even seized records and computer systems from the company's offices. When they went back to question him again on September 14th, he had fled back to Israel. And what about the dancing Israelis' pictures themselves? The Justice Department destroyed their copies on January 27, 2014. And these intelligence agents on an intelligence mission who were there to document the event of 9/11 before anyone knew 9/11 was taking place? Don't worry, they were just spying on Arab terrorists.
And while the FBI or certain sources might believe that in fact they were Israeli intelligence, they don't believe that the U.S. was a target, that they were actually investigating Muslim groups?
They believe if this was an intelligence operation by Israel, that it was focused on the Islamic groups and charities that raise money for groups that are considered by U.S. law enforcement and others terrorist groups. And you'll note that after September 11th, the U.S. moved on many of these groups with indictments, arrests, raids on their headquarters, something that hadn't happened prior to this.
These are groups that Israel believes have been funding Hamas and other terrorist organizations.
Groups that are responsible for most of the suicide bombings there.
But this story is not merely preposterous on its face. Even the implications of this story are themselves preposterous. If indeed the official story is a ridiculous lie, then are we to believe that these crack Israeli Mossad operatives, who were presumably aware of the attack that was about to take place, had been sent to photograph the burning tower from a parking lot across the Hudson River? And that these specially trained intelligence professionals on their super-secret mission were celebrating, high-fiving, and going out of their way to be noticed in performance of their task? This is equally preposterous. The only other possible conclusion is that these men were serving merely as a distraction, that they were not there to photograph for Israeli intelligence one of the most heavily photographed scenes in the world on that morning, but instead to be noticed and arrested as a way to divert attention from a much bigger and more sinister story. So if they were meant to distract from a bigger story, what story could that possibly be?
It has been more than 16 years since a civilian working for the Navy was charged with passing secrets to Israel. Jonathan Pollard pled guilty to conspiracy to commit espionage and is serving a life sentence. At first, Israeli leaders claimed Pollard was part of a rogue operation, but later took responsibility for his work. Now, Fox News has learned some U.S. investigators believe that there are Israelis again very much engaged in spying in and on the U.S., who may have known things they didn't tell us before September 11th. Fox News correspondent Carl Cameron has details in the first of a four-part series.
Since September 11th, more than 60 Israelis have been arrested or detained, either under the new Patriot anti-terrorism law or for immigration violations. A handful of active Israeli military were among those detained, according to investigators, who say some of the detainees also failed polygraph questions when asked about alleged surveillance activities against and in the United States. There is no indication that the Israelis were involved in the 9/11 attacks, but investigators suspect that the Israelis may have gathered intelligence about the attacks in advance and not shared it. A highly placed investigator said there are, quote, tie-ins, but when asked for details, he flatly refused to describe them, saying, quote, evidence linking these Israelis to 9/11 is classified. I cannot tell you about evidence that has been gathered. It's classified information. Asked this week about another sprawling investigation and the detention of 60 Israelis since September 11th, the Bush administration treated the questions like hot potatoes.
I would just refer you to the Department of Justice with it. I'm not familiar with the report.
I'm aware that some Israeli citizens have been detained. With respect to why they are being detained and the other aspects of your question, whether it's because they are in intelligence services or what they were doing, I will defer to the Department of Justice and the FBI to answer that.
Beyond the 60 apprehended or detained and many deported since September 11th, another group of 140 Israeli individuals have been arrested and detained in this year in what government documents describe as, quote, an organized intelligence gathering operation designed to, quote, penetrate government facilities. Most of those individuals said they had served in the Israeli military, which is compulsory there, but they also had, most of them, intelligence expertise and either worked for Amdocs or other companies in Israel that specialize in wiretapping. Earlier this week, the Israeli embassy here in Washington denied any spying against or in the United States.
Carl, what about this question of advanced knowledge of what was going to happen on 9/11? How clear are investigators that some Israeli agents may have known something?
Well, it's very explosive information, obviously, and there's a great deal of evidence that they say they have collected, none of it necessarily conclusive. It's more when they put it all together. A bigger question, they say, is how could they not have known? Almost a direct quote, Britt.
The most phenomenal part of this report is not that it was eventually erased from the web by Fox News itself, but that it ever made it to the air at all. In December of 2001, Fox News investigative reporter Carl Cameron filed an explosive 4-part series that went in-depth into an Israeli art student spying ring that had been under investigation before 9/11, extensive Israeli wiretapping of sensitive US government communications, and the 60 Israeli spies that were detained in the wake of the September 11th attacks. Unsurprisingly, the story was quickly dropped, and no mainstream journalists dared to continue probing into the matter. This is the real story of Israeli spies in 9/11. Not some vague rumors about some dancing Israelis, but an FBI dragnet that swept up the largest foreign spying ring ever caught red-handed on American soil. And although the FBI were convinced that these spies knew about 9/11 in advance, their investigations were stifled and the issue was swept under the rug. Rather than making Israel enemy number one in the war on terror, Israel remains to this day the US's most important ally.
And if I'm fortunate enough to be elected president, the United States will reaffirm we have a strong and enduring national interest in Israel's security.
In 2001, weeks after the attacks on New York City and on Washington, and frankly, the attacks on all of us, attacks that perpetrated, and they were perpetrated by the Islamic fundamentalists, Mayor Rudy Giuliani visited Israel to show solidarity with terror victims. I sent my plane because I backed the mission for Israel 100%.
But perhaps this is understandable. After all, we all remember how Yasser Arafat gloated about 9/11 and said it was good for Palestinians, right? Oh wait, that wasn't Yasser Arafat. It was Benjamin Netanyahu.
The Israeli newspaper Ma'ariv has reported Israel's former Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has publicly said the September 11th attacks have been good for Israel. Netanyahu said, quote, "We're benefiting from one thing, and that is the attack on the Twin Towers and Pentagon and the American struggle in Iraq."
My name is Donald Trump, and I'm a big fan of Israel. And frankly, a strong prime minister is a strong Israel. And you truly have a great prime minister. In Benjamin Netanyahu, there's nobody like him. He's a winner. He's highly respected. He's highly thought of by all. And people really do have great, great respect for what's happened in Israel. So vote for Benjamin. Terrific guy, terrific leader, great for Israel.
Given that the ultimate consequence of 9/11 was the beginning of a now 15-year-long struggle to transform the Middle East, a struggle that the neocons that went on to populate the Bush administration had been openly advocating since the clean break policy paper in the mid-1990s, it isn't hard to see how the September 11th attacks were indeed a boon for Israel. But information linking Israeli spies to advanced knowledge of 9/11 remains classified information. In a world of true justice, the dancing Israelis and other Israeli spies with insider advanced knowledge of the 9/11 attacks, who openly celebrated those attacks, would be the targets of the war on terror, not its beneficiaries.
Some evil is just, it can't be explained.
Are these people happy? Are they joyous now? Are they celebrating?
Oh, absolutely. They're celebrating.
God.
There's one report. This has not been confirmed, but there's...
We are in a period where conspiracy theory is flourishing.
There has been an explosion of conspiracy theories.
Conspiracy theorists are having a field day. It's like Christmas for conspiracy theorists. Countless conspiracy theories.
It feels like there's more of this out there than there has been.
Why are there so many of these people?
Conspiracy theories are a great American pastime, and not all of them are on the right. There's plenty on the left as well.
They could be from the far left, they could be from the far right, they could have unconventional, deranged
theories.
They had very much gone down the kind of rabbit hole of conspiracy thinking, all kinds of ideas, the world is not as it seems, and so on. That's a very American preoccupation.
Conspiracy theories are not new.
Conspiracy theories have been woven into the fabric of American society since before the signing of the Constitution.
A lot of these conspiracy theories have a presence, or at least a grudging acceptance, within the political mainstream.
It's out there. It's become part of pop culture now.
I see the pretty mainstream conservative media really flirting with these folks and maybe starting to mainstream some of this craziness, so we maybe won't be able to ignore it.
Wingnuts, how the lunatic fringe is hijacking America.
The fringe has become the center. The Republican chairman of Homeland Security is writing conspiracy theory letters, and they're convening conspiracy theory hearings, and Republican senators are introducing conspiracy theory legislation.
You have politicians who are, repeating conspiracy theories, who are advocating conspiracy theories.
The most influential conservative media online is full-on embracing the conspiracy theorists.
Every conspiracy theory are all coming together, and they've created this narrative, but it's all out of their talk radio base. It's all out of their right-wing online base, and they've now converged on Congress, and they've pulled them into the conspiracy theorizing too. It's brilliant.
Reality has been subsumed into a conspiracy theory.
I ask questions, and what perturbs me is that you don't get answers. Nobody wants to talk about it. This event that changed our entire history of our country, why aren't we allowed to discuss it? Why aren't we allowed to ask questions? The moment you do, you get a reaction like he gave me. How dare you? How dare you question your government? In this country, I thought before, and it was good to ask questions. It was
challenge authority.
Challenge authority. But now apparently we've changed to where you're not allowed to challenge authority. You have to accept what the government tells you, keep your mouth shut, and stay in line. Well, that's not the America that I served as the military.
If someone wants to dig deeper and not accept the government's analysis at face value, they're considered almost un-American. The overwhelming majority of Americans don't believe the official story, yet anyone who questions it is labeled fringe, a conspiracy theorist.
And we're not even saying what happened, we're questioning things. We're questioning based on reality and statistics and facts and information.
They won't even listen to them enough to see if what they're saying is true. And that's really sad, but it's dangerous.
Any of those theories that you've heard of at all have any credence?
Well, no, frankly. You'd think there might be something useful in it. No, there's no credence to it at all. All of their claims are spurious.
They're backed up by nothing. They're backed up by nothing.
How strong are their arguments? I mean, do they lay out their claim and they just say conspiracy, and then they just leave it right there? Or, I mean, do they really detail out their line of thinking?
There is not one shred of evidence to back that insane assertion up.
A conspiracy theory based on nothing.
There is absolutely no evidence.
Without a shred of evidence.
None whatsoever.
Completely crazy theory.
You have no evidence, no backup, no proof.
Absolutely no evidence.
There's not a fact in between there.
Making statements that he can't back up with fact.
No basis in fact.
They just don't stand up to any kind of logic or interrogation of the facts.
Vast conspiracies that are hiding these vast problems that don't exist, that have been disproven over and over again.
That preposterous theory that's been disproven time and time again.
We lined up all of their claims in our special issue and knocked them down one by one.
It's all been hackneyed and pulled apart and thoroughly debunked.
Conspiracy theories which are not true.
Don't give me the conspiracy bullshit. Come on, you're a more intelligent man than that. Come on. I mean, come on. Listen, there has never been a conspiracy in this country.
People are just spinning stories. They can believe whatever they want, but it doesn't mean that it's real.
No theory of anything explains all the facts, even if there are still some unsolved mysteries, which is perfectly okay. We have to have a certain tolerance for ambiguity. We can't explain everything.
Not everything is a conspiracy. Some things just are what they appear to be. That usually tends to be the reality of things.
The limits of debate in this country are established before the debate even begins, and everyone else is marginalized. They're made to seem either to be communists or some sort of disloyal person. A kook, there's a word, and now it's conspiracy. See, they've made that something that should not be even entertained for a minute, that powerful people might get together and have a plan. Doesn't happen. You're a kook. You're a conspiracy buff.
They're a bunch of nutcases.
Nutty conspiracy garbage?
Only those considered nut jobs question the official conclusion.
They're marginal nuts. These nuts are still in the shadows, Mike.
A lie that wallows in the shadows, like this kooky conspiracy theory.
This was just kooky people. I probably wouldn't pay attention to it.
There have always been crazy people who gravitated, if they have schizophrenia, who gravitate toward conspiracy theories.
Crazy nut jobs have always been there.
All right, the evidence is overwhelming to you because you're a conspiracy nut.
He's considered a crank and a kook by most academics.
Some nutty college professors are trotting out that nonsense, and apparently some Americans are buying it.
Most people think you're a nut. Most people think your views are not even worth listening to.
Conspiracy nuts.
Rather than actually debate the issue and talk about just what's going on here,
Alan,
you want to make it personal and go after the individual.
Nothing surprises me what these wackos can come up with.
He really lives in the land of wacky.
Unfortunately, the act of questioning anything about this event now runs you the risk of being dismissed as a conspiracy theorist or a lunatic by the corporate media.
Ranting like a lunatic.
A lunatic. An absolute, diehard, insane lunatic.
Conspiracy theories, it was a real buzzword for loonies.
They're idiots.
He has the right to be an idiot.
I'm trying to get beyond the idiot calling and actually have a conversation with you if that's possible.
He is an idiot.
Can we believe all right, we've already established that you think he's an idiot. That's your level of debate.
Stupid conspiracy theories.
They are paranoid. You cannot argue logic to someone who is mentally ill.
Just think of them as mental patients. So that's what I do with conspiracy theorists. They're off their rockers.
These are the type of people that should not have their hands on weapons. These are the type of people that should not have a platform to speak. These are the people that should be seeking mental help and evaluation.
This man has problems, all right? He's got problems. He's a madman. The things he has said are so crazy, it's frightening.
These people are just a bunch of maniacs.
The question is why? Why do people believe these things?
Yeah, I spend all day today talking to scholars and academics who have studied conspiracy theories. These are people who are inclined to believe that the government is out to get them anyway. The media is in cahoots with it.
These aberrant thoughts about how the government is out to pull the wool over our eyes, if you will.
I always believe it's to exercise a level of intelligence over other people, like they know something that you don't.
I think you're right. I think it's people who are looking for drama, who have general angst in their lives. They have very little to talk about that's interesting.
They feel like they are part of some enlightened fight against the establishment.
You see them come to life. They become animated when they talk about these theories and that they're going to persuade me to change my mind into belief. And I think it gives them a sense of authority or power. Most of the time, I agree with you. I think they're just nonsense.
If you believe one conspiracy theory, you're more likely to believe 2 or 3 or 4.
Have you ever met someone who believed one conspiracy theory?
The most fantastical things are taken as common knowledge.
You've been hearing the conspiracy theories on this for many years as well, and sometimes you have to scratch your head.
Why are some people so eager to believe in conspiracies?
Historically, we see that these conspiracies come after very upsetting events.
In a time of economic difficulty, or in a time when things are going wrong in very visible ways, people try to seize on something awful, which may in fact be causal. It may have produced the bad outcome, or it may just be made up. So if you're scared or if you're angry, and a lot of people are, conspiracy theory seems appealing. And if they're politically polarized and full of anger or distrust, then they can start believing something that's baseless or ridiculous.
Each time something really scary and disastrous happens, people search for meaning.
And in a way, it kind of helps explain what happened. It explains this tragedy. It kind of gives meaning.
It gives them a sense of control over their world, they feel. I think that's why they do it.
The assassination of JFK This has to be something big, comparable to killing a president. Lee Harvey Oswald acting alone, a lone nut, a nobody, that doesn't jive. That feels better to most people.
People hate thinking about, in a flash of an eye, terrorist bombers can come in and crash into the World Trade Center. They would rather see that, oh yes, there was always a system. There was always some overriding explanation that can let us make sense of the world.
People always want to believe that there's a more powerful explanation for these things. It's not just something went wrong or there's evil people in the world. They want to believe that somebody's more in control, even if it's somebody who they don't like. They want to believe that somebody's sort of pulling the switches.
The important thing is to draw a line between people who are fringe groups who believe, for instance, that everything bad that happens in America is part of a massive conspiracy, including September 11th was an inside job, and people who are obsessed about the Kennedy assassination.
What fuels these trends of conspiracy?
It's because of something called cognitive dissonance. We want to balance our view of the world with the way things should be.
Confirmation bias, as psychologists call it, to look for only evidence that supports their theories and disregard anything that says otherwise.
These are people who inhabit a media world entirely contained by the internet, fringe sites. They don't read newspapers. They don't listen to the radio. They pretty much just get their news from radicalized websites that they go to on a daily basis.
What I call fright-wing politics. It's way beyond left and right. It's really that murky ground of conspiracy theories that's been proliferating on the internet and inciting some people to take it a step too far towards violence.
These guys actually believe what they say. The people that are leading the so-called truth movement, the ones I've met, they seem to actually believe it. So.
Oh, no, don't get me wrong. I think they do believe it, and which is why I believe these guys are dangerous. I believe these guys are anarchists that are looking to tear us apart. I mean, this is the kind of group that a Timothy McVeigh would come from.
Yeah, that's right. That's what makes it a little bit scary.
The floating of fantastic conspiracy theories that in many cases have helped drive people to violence.
What has changed about this country and the world that has made these conspiracy theories more dangerous these days?
Conspiracy theory radicalism, which almost always butts up against justifying violence.
A lot of people who are looking into this, they're just curious. They have questions. That's fine. People should ask questions. They shouldn't believe everything they see or read. But when you start asking those questions, then you have to pay attention to the answers. And what the conspiracy people do is they reject the vast body of reasonable accounts, and then they seize on these few little anomalies that they think disprove the mainstream view.
What people do on the fringes is they take those anomalies and they try to construct a whole new theory, but the new theory doesn't explain all the old facts that the old theory explains just fine.
Conspiracy theorists, like all sorts of theorists, take disparate facts and put them together. And what makes a conspiracy theorist a little bit different is they put the facts together in alternative ways that are tinged with a kind of paranoia.
Classic conspiracy theory, little grains of truth, but all adding up to something that really isn't true.
The idea of a conspiracy theorist is, if I can disprove this point, then therefore I am proving the vast conspiracy. Any official story about anything can be torn down if the questions are incredibly broad or incredibly minute.
I think that conspiracy theories in general really do work a bit like a game of telephone. They are told and retold and tend to get more and more far out in the telling.
Urban legend type tales that have been told and retold without any factual basis.
People are fundamentally skeptical. People don't trust the explanations they have. This mistrust of an official explanation motivates them to go looking further, and then they want to keep going and keep going and keep going and find out what they think could be a more convincing explanation.
Many of these people spend 10 to 12 hours a day on the internet, and they're sort of like idiot savants. They just made themselves experts in the minutiae of the conspiracy theory that they're obsessed with.
Even when there is a clear explanation, then you have this search for supposed other evidence out there, and people just kind of pick it up and run with it, even when it seems completely unwarranted.
We are natural pattern-seeking animals. We look for and find connections. We connect the dots like constellations in the sky. We find the constellations of meaning in our complex, chaotic world.
I think that conspiracy theorists are making it more miserable for us in this, as we pick and choose our ways of life.
I hear you.
When you blame the government or whoever, you're actually removing the blame from the actual perpetrator, and you're putting it on somebody else. So in this quest to speak the truth or whatever, they're really doing a disservice to everyone involved.
When you reject facts, reality, and you grasp to this idea that the government is out to get you, it's a slippery slope. What's next? The helicopters that fly over your house, the medevac helicopters, the news helicopters, they're out to get you.
You hear this stuff, and it just makes you sick to your stomach.
I loathe conspiracy theories.
Can't these people give it a rest for one day?
I've given up on trying to change conspiracy theorists. They're going to be with us for a long time.
When you have policy being shaped by fantasy, you end up with pretty bad policy.
When did seeking the truth become a bad thing? And how did the pursuit of any kind of facts become so objectionable? Look, this dismissal is deliberate. It's also severely dumbing down the dialogue we should be having, and in fact, it's an endangerment to investigative journalism. For crying out loud, to question official narratives is the role of journalists, historians, and documentarians. Otherwise, we'd just be getting our news verbatim from government press releases. The majority of Americans believe that JFK was assassinated by a conspiracy. And also, a majority of people have questions about 9/11 also. Knowing this, how does it feel to go on shows like Piers Morgan and other shows on the mainstream media and to be ridiculed and painted as a lunatic for bringing up these issues?
Well, because that was the CIA's mission to anyone that questioned it. That's how they do. They try to marginalize you. They try to make it seem like you're a conspiracy nut.
It's in a CIA memo that you say conspiracy theory. I mean, that's declassified. The CIA, right after they killed Kennedy, put out these talking points.
The government and media continue to rely on the conspiracy theory pejorative label, paired with the PSYOP tactics found in this memo, to dismiss conspiracy allegations to this day. The CIA's strategy to make conspiracy belief a target of ridicule and hostility is arguably the most successful propaganda campaign in modern history. The government's network of covert propaganda assets and friendly elite contacts referenced in this document were partially brought to light in a 1975 congressional investigation into government agencies' intelligence activities. The hearings, known as the Church Committee, were investigating the intelligence activities of the CIA, NSA, and FBI after illegal surveillance activities surfaced during the Watergate scandal.
Do you have any people being paid by the CIA who are contributing to a major circulation American journal? We do have people who submit pieces to American journals. Do you have any people paid by the CIA who are working for television networks? This, I think, gets into the kind of getting into the details, Mr. Chairman, that I'd like to get into in executive session.
The investigation revealed that the CIA was paying bribe money equivalent to $1 billion adjusted for inflation under the table to heads of major media companies, editors, and reporters to act as gatekeepers and propagandists for the establishment. The Commission's final report determined that, quote, the CIA currently maintains a network of several hundred foreign individuals around the world who provide intelligence for the CIA and at times attempt to influence opinion through the use of covert propaganda. These individuals provide the CIA with direct access to a large number of newspapers, periodicals, scores of press services and news agencies, radio and television stations, commercial book publishers, and other foreign media outlets. In 1977, Pulitzer Prize winner Carl Bernstein shined further light on the CIA's propaganda network in his Rolling Stone article titled "The CIA and the Media." The article exposes how America's most powerful news media worked hand in glove with the CIA and that the Church Committee actually played a part in covering it up. After leaving the Washington Post, where he uncovered the Watergate scandal with partner Bob Woodward, Carl Bernstein spent 6 months investigating the relationship between the CIA and the media. His findings revealed that for the last 25 years, the CIA built a network of over 400 covert propaganda paid operatives, secretly spread throughout influential positions in the mainstream media, including the Associated Press, Reuters, UPI, ABC, NBC, Newsweek, and the largest newspaper and magazine publisher, Hearst, adding, quote, "By far the most valuable of these associations, according to CIA officials, have been with the New York Times, CBS, and Time Incorporated."
At CBS, we had been contacted by the CIA. As a matter of fact, by the time I became the head of the whole news and public affairs operation in 1954, ships had been established, and I was told about them and asked if I'd carry on with them.
The CIA's secret propaganda campaign to manipulate the media came to be known as Operation Mockingbird.
Operation Mockingbird, you know, this was a program that the CIA, FBI was inserting operatives within all the major media networks. I mean, we're talking about all of them.
Yeah.
Papers, publications. My whole question is this still going on today? Because they've really permeated throughout the culture of the establishment media. And really, we see the establishment media today, they just parrot the establishment. I'm like, wait, has this gone full circle?
You say that continues today?
Well, yeah, I would think probably for a reporter it would continue today, but because of all of the revelations of the period of the 1970s, it seems to me that a reporter's got to be much more circumspect in doing it now, or he runs the risk of at least being looked at with considerable disfavor by the public. I think you've got to be much more careful about it.
You ask, is this still going on today? Well, we can look at the last National Defense Authorization Act, NDAA 2013, has a provision in there that legalizes propaganda.
Propaganda, a program by governments to manipulate people's thoughts and opinions.
We are in an information war, and we are losing that war. I'll be very blunt in my assessment.
Clearly, the United States feels on the defensive, in part because it can no longer monopolize terms of the debate. There's other information out there. There are other points of view. And those points of view are profoundly damaging to a country that believes that its point of view is the only point of view.
The First Lady of the United States recently addressed concerns about internet. She said we're all going to have to rethink how we deal with the internet. There are a number of serious issues without any kind of editing function or gatekeeping function.
She said what the problem with the internet was just getting started back in those days, is that there are no gatekeepers. Think about that. There are no gatekeepers. She wants gatekeepers on the free flow of information.
1995 was also on a 93 memo. Clinton administration feared internet's ability to democratize news. It says, the new media is here. We've got to control info. We can't let the public have access, these are quotes, to free information. This attack on free speech is happening because the old dinosaur media, the state-run media, is in free fall. You have a perfect storm of state-run media and government wanting to control information.
If you look at where a lot of the work originates, where the first things come out on the internet, some of them tend to be these political fringe sites, and yet they're treated by much of the media as if they're somehow credible, that a quote from one of those sites is no different than something from the New York Times.
We've got to have the media call anyone that questions us conspiracy theorists, and any media that's not the Washington Post or New York Times is a conspiracy theory. They want to set the Overton window. They want to set the parameters of debate where only what MSNBC says or CNN says with White House talking points is the acceptable political discussion.
They knew what the internet meant for them. And
they were conspiring like the Soviet Union to kill it in its crib.
The great story here for anybody willing to find it and write about it and explain it is this vast right-wing conspiracy that has been conspiring against my husband since the day he announced for president.
This is not our opinion or a conspiracy theory like Hillary puts in your mind, just a denial button people can push. They release this on the Clinton official presidential library website.
Despite the media and government's outright condemnation of conspiracy theories, the public is becoming increasingly skeptical of the government and the mainstream media.
It's hardly breaking news that the public has soured on the media, but the latest figures are truly sobering. 80% of Americans believe TV and newspaper reporters are dishonest and unethical, according to a Gallup poll. 80%, putting them barely ahead of car salesmen and members of Congress.
Faith in American institutions is at an all-time low. We've told you this for years now.
According to a new Gallup poll, American distrust of the news media reached an all-time high this year.
The establishment openly admits they fear the alternative information provided by independent news online because it threatens the corporate media's monopoly over information.
In recent decades, worldwide social change has experienced unprecedented historical acceleration, particularly because instant mass communications, such as radio, television, and the internet, cumulatively have been stimulating a universal awakening of mass political consciousness. The resulting widespread rise in worldwide populist activism is proving inimical to external domination of the kind that prevailed in the age of colonialism and imperialism. Persistent and highly motivated populist resistance of politically awakened and historically resentful peoples to external control has proven to be increasingly difficult to suppress.
In earlier times, it was easier to control 1 million people, literally. It was easier to control 1 million people than physically to kill 1 million people. Today, it is infinitely easier to kill 1 million people than to control 1 million people. It is easier to kill than to control.
The mainstream media's response is to aggressively attack the internet.
Unlike in the past where we had fax networks and shortwave radio, we now have the internet.
The internet is full of nutty theories.
Conspiracy theories, the web, of course, is full of them.
That murky ground of conspiracy theories that's been proliferating on the internet.
It's been bubbling up kind of from the fringes for years and gradually making headway into the mainstream.
On the internet it started, right?
On the internet.
I think that this internet stuff with this access now that people have has made more crazy people, because people who are borderline crazy now go in there and become crazy.
You can get your crazy opinion heard.
They have wild ideas, and it's because they've been just talking to each other, and it doesn't have to be factual anymore. If you have everybody that's surrounding you believes the same thing, it becomes an alternative reality for you.
By using the internet to mobilize people that feel displaced, that feel like they've been on the outskirts of society, and give them a place where they can find a sense of belonging and maybe make a difference in their own way. And it's a problem, and we see that it's effective. We see that they are shaping the discussion online, on message boards, on Twitter, on social media. And the internet, you know, we thought that it would be this place where you know, it's wonderful in a lot of ways because a lot of different viewpoints and a lot of different people have a voice like never before. But unfortunately, it's provided a forum where disinformation, false theories, people that are just trying to make a name for themselves, bloggers or whatever, that have absolutely no accountability for the truth, are able to rile up a mass amount of people online. It provides this voice for fringe voices, extremists.
The platform that it provides for fringe and radical views.
Alternative media, and thanks to the internet, it fuels these things.
People begin to presume that these conspiracies are in fact true as they're, you know, introduced to this on a daily basis. You repeat it over and over and over again, and suddenly the conspiratorial theories begin to take on a life of its own.
It provides a place for these people, a place where these people can congregate and feed off of each other's biases. It's almost like a community that is almost like a cult, I would say, that is formed online, and they mobilize. They find a home. They find a place where they're heard, and they find a sense of belonging. They find an outlet where they can a platform to voice their deranged views.
The extreme fringe is given a platform for what otherwise would not be considered reputable television. You know, most broadcasts wouldn't have on the types of voices with these conspiratorial theories.
It tends to multiply online, and you see these dark corners of the internet where people pile on, and there's this very minute parsing of the technicalities of the supposed evidence, and more detail gets added and accumulated, and it kind of feeds on itself.
It really almost makes you ask the question, would it have been better if we'd never invented the internet?
The ultimate goal that these people have in mind is the goal to create a one-world government run by the banking industry, run by the bankers. I met Rockefeller through a female attorney I knew who called me up one day and said, one of the Rockefellers would like to meet you. I said, sure, I'd love to meet him. And I met him, and I liked him, and he was a very, very smart man. And we used to talk and share ideas and thoughts. And he's the one who told me 11 months before 9/11 ever happened that there was going to be an event. Never told me what the event was going to be. And out of that event, we were going to invade Afghanistan to run pipelines from the Caspian Sea. We were going to invade Iraq to take over the oil fields, establish a base in the Middle East, and make it all part of the New World Order. Later, 9/11 happened. And I remember he was telling me how you're going to see soldiers looking in caves for people in Afghanistan and Pakistan and all these places. And there's going to be this war on terror, of which there's no real enemy. And the whole thing is a giant hoax. But it's a way for the government to take over the American people.
He told you it was going to be a hoax.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. There's no question. He says, there's going to be war on terror. And he's just laughing. 9/11 was done by people in our own government and our own banking system to perpetuate the fear of the American people into subordinating themselves to anything the government wants them to do. That's what it's about, and to create this war, this endless war on terror. And that's why and that was the first lie. And the next lie was going into Iraq to get Saddam Hussein out with his weapons of mass destruction. Look, this whole war on terror is a fraud. It's a farce. It's very difficult to say it out loud because people are intimidated against saying it. Because if you say it, they want to make you into a nutcase. It was 9/11 that allowed this war on terror to begin. And until we get to the bottom root of 9/11, the truth of 9/11, we'll never know about the war on terror.
I have trouble believing this, but a new poll by Scripps Howard and the University of Ohio says 36% of Americans believe it is likely or somewhat likely that the U.S. government either assisted in the 9/11 attacks or did nothing to stop them.
Let us never tolerate outrageous conspiracy theories concerning the attacks of September the 11th. Malicious lies that attempt to shift the blame away from the terrorists themselves, away from the guilty.
Are you one of those that was an inside job, guys? Well, let me tell you something.
An inside job? How dare you? How dare you?
9/11 was not an inside job. It was an Osama bin Laden job with 19 people from Saudi Arabia. They murdered 3,000 Americans and other farmers, including over 200 other Muslims. And we look like idiots, folks, denying that the people who murdered our fellow citizens did it when they are continuing to murder people all around the world. So we heard from you. You go away.
Thanks for coming on. You have no evidence that the government's behind 9/11, and I frankly think it's an awful thing to allege, considering it's not true and you haven't proved that it is. I'm merely saying it is wrong, blasphemous, and sinful for you to suggest, imply, or help other people come to the conclusion that the U.S. government killed 3,000 of its own citizens, because it didn't.
It is ridiculous to suggest anything other than the Al-Qaeda destroyed those buildings.
Stop asking me to raise this ridiculous topic on the show and start asking your doctor if Paxil is right for you.
Whatever one may feel about President Bush, that the government would deliberately kill 3,000 people. Cheney really wanted to have the cause of death of 3,000 people? Come on. To accuse the president of this, that's a terrible accusation to me.
To say that these guys want to attack our country, in spite of the fact I don't agree with their policies, I don't agree with how they prosecuted the war on terror, but to say that they are behind it, or that they wanted to attack us and killed 3,000 Americans is so far beyond the pale to defy credulity.
Anybody who thinks that 9/11 was carried out by the government isn't a truther. They're idiots.
This whole idea that you have some documents which you say at least reinforce the idea that the government had advanced knowledge that 9/11 could happen.
Absolutely.
And didn't work to stop it. Now, I find a hard time believing you actually believe that.
Oh, come off it, Jesse.
No, not oh, come off it. Wait a minute. Every war fought starts with a false flag operation.
You can't, in all seriousness, sit there and try and make out anybody.
Okay, let me ask you this, Piers. Wait a minute. Let me ask you something. How much studying have you actually done of 9/11 other than what the government's told you and what mainstream media has told you? I've been studying it 4 years.
I was editor of a national newspaper.
I've talked to people. Wait a minute.
Depth every day for 5-6 months.
Really?
So I know a lot about it.
Well,
and one
then
thing
how
I do
come,
know is,
let me ask you this
you
then.
cannot say that any member of the Bush administration knew it was going to happen or wanted it to happen. It's a ridiculous thing to say.
Ridiculous.
You believe that Dick Cheney, George Bush, and the whole administration should be prosecuted for their acts? You're making up Rosie O'Donnell-like scandals that says that 9/11 was an inside job.
Well, why are you not allowed to ask anything about it?
No,
why,
you're
when
concluding.
you approach the government, I approach the government.
I read everything possible. I watched all the hearings. You're right. I haven't read. You looked at my reading list. Have you read the 9/11 report and you think it's a piece of fiction?
No, I believe everything in it. I believe my government's never lied to me, have they? And you notice how if you bring up 9/11 and they have any questions about it, immediately everyone attacks you over it, tells you you're crazy, calls you Rosie O'Donnell, insult you. Why? Because I ask questions? Defense of free speech. Popular speech, the First Amendment doesn't need to be defended. It's unpopular speech is why we have that amendment. You question 9/11, you're asking unpopular speech today.
According to a recent poll, 49.3% of the people in New York believe that our leaders knew the 9/11 attacks were planned and that they intentionally failed to act. Are 49.3% of us just fucking crazy?
There are a group of screwballs out here, and I mean truly screwballs, who believe that we were not attacked on 9/11 by terrorists flying planes, that those people really weren't killed by terrorists, that that's not what happened. And in fact, George W. Bush was sitting somewhere in the White House basement with one of these plungers, and he blew up those buildings. That's what these people believe. They are truly crazy people. Just so you know, we're not muffling intelligent dissent here.
If you hear the shouting, it's a group of demonstrators who've come. 9/11 was an inside job. Oh, get a life. Get a life. 9/11 was an inside job.
This woman, we need to be clear, is an out-and-out lunatic. She's a conspiracy theorist. She's a 9/11 truther. She thinks that water fluoridation is a government conspiracy.
The people who said that 9/11 didn't really happen, or that 9/11 was an inside job, that 9/11 was not actually an attack on our country, but was rather a hoax perpetrated by our government in order to enslave us or something.
Yeah, Rachel, because someone who wants the truth about why things are the way they are must believe that 9/11 either never happened, or that it was a hoax, or that the government completely engineered every facet in order to enslave humanity. Because apparently it's too hard to believe that this government would not care about the lives of human beings in order to advance geopolitical goals. Is it really too hard to believe the fact that Bush and his cabinet turned a blind eye to let the attacks happen, or even ensure that they happened?
A 9/11 truther. If you don't know what a 9/11 truther is, let me quickly tell you about them.
The 9/11 for truth, I didn't know what that meant, that it was a real buzzword for loonies. Perhaps the most fascinating of terms that have become a pejorative for the establishment is truther.
It's so-called truthers. The truthers who perpetuate the theory that the United States orchestrated the attacks on September 11th.
One of the groups that I've been warning about for a very long time are these 9/11 truthers.
Take the 9/11 truthers.
These truthers are exactly the kind of people who want to rock this nation's foundation, tear us apart, and plant the seeds of dissatisfaction in all of us.
These 9/11 truthers, who I've been telling you for years, are dangerous.
I find it amazing, this kind of pejorative term truther for seeking the truth.
Everybody's like, truther? You're a truther. You know, when idiots are calling brilliant people stupid, you got a real problem.
If a truther is simply a person that cares about evidence and facts, no matter how ugly or uncomfortable they may be, then maybe that's a label we should all embrace.
Those people who would like to destroy us are enemies like Al-Qaeda. They'd like to destroy us, and they will work with anyone. There are also people like white supremacists or 9/11 truthers that would also like to destroy the country. They'll work with anybody they can.
You know, it took me about a year to start hating the 9/11 victims' families. I didn't think I could hate victims faster than the 9/11 victims.
You have a warped view of this world and a warped view of this country.
Well, explain that. Let me give you an example.
No, I'm not going to debate this with you.
Well, let me give you an example.
Glick was saying without a shred of evidence that President Bush and Bush the elder were directly responsible for 9/11. Now, that kind of stuff is not only loony, it's defamation. In respect for your father,
September 14th, do you want to know what I was doing?
Shut up.
Oh, please don't tell me to shut up.
In respect for your father, who was a Port Authority worker, a fine American, who got killed unnecessarily by barbarians.
By radical extremists trained by this government.
Respect
not
for
the
him.
People of America,
I'm not
the people,
address
the ruling class, the small minority.
Cut his mic. Cut his mic. I'm not going to dress you down anymore, out of respect for your father. This is our house here. If somebody comes to your house and begins spitting on the floor, you'd remove them. Glick was out of control and spewing hatred for this program and his country using vile propaganda. These nuts are still in the shadows, Mike, and you're giving them power.
Rosie O'Donnell, is she mainstream media?
Yeah.
Every day she's got well, listen, she just said this crap this week.
And what happened to her?
Tower 7.
And what happened to her?
People cheered for her. Her audience cheered for her, and people said, boy, Rosie's onto something. Tower 7 fell because we blew it up. I mean, these screwballs are among us, Bill.
Rosie's not going to be on that forum much longer because of what she's doing here.
Do you believe that the government had anything to do with the attack of 9/11? Do you believe in a conspiracy in terms of the attack of 9/11?
I do believe that it defies physics for the World Trade Center Tower 7, Building 7, which collapsed in on itself. It is impossible for a building to fall the way it fell without explosives being involved. World Trade Center 7. World Trader 1 and 2 got hit by planes. 7, miraculously, the first time in history, it is physically impossible.
And who do you think is responsible for that?
I have no idea. But to say that we don't know that it imploded and it was an implosion and a demolition is beyond ignorant. Look at the films, get a physics expert here from Yale, from Harvard, pick the school. It defies reason.
Let's get one. Let's get one, because that
I would do it.
Is the unthinkable.
It is the unthinkable. But imagine if somebody could convince you of that, could prove it to you, Elizabeth. Just 7.
I don't think it would happen.
More than 1,300 architects and engineers examined the evidence about Building 7's collapse and disagree with the official report issued by the National Institute of Standards and Technology.
It was in full free-fall acceleration. That is impossible because in a natural collapse, columns would have to buckle. When columns buckle, there is a minimum resistance. It's asymptotic, if you know what that means. That means it never goes to zero.
Five sheets of glass were broken in that test. Danielle and Ivan, you guessed correctly, and you each received 1 point.
The only thing that I've found that is even similar to what we're doing are people who are trying to disprove 9/11 being a terrorist attack. I have literally found probably 10 websites using an example of dropping a bowling ball through beams of glass to explain why the Twin Towers is a conspiracy.
You're going to guess your way through this?
I did not guess. I was up till 3 in the morning.
Looking up conspiracy theories.
So it's impossible. You can't reach.
So here's what, I guess in layman's terms, to just get my hands here, Peter. So what he's saying is that the top floor collapses, hits the next floor, hits the next floor, hits the next floor. So it's bang, 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 bang. The weight of the upper floors.
It would slow down. What I'm trying to say is it was in full free-fall acceleration. All of its potential energy was being converted
Instead of
to
what
motion.
I just described, the thing just collapsed like a pancake.
Newton's third law of motion, which states that for every action there is an equal and opposite reaction. This means that two opposing forces will neutralize each other. In a head-on collision, the two cars absorb each other's kinetic energy and transform it into physical deformation or damage. After that, the system comes to a rest, as there is no more energy to be dissipated.
The top section pushing on the bottom section, it's going to meet equal forces as it goes. Both sections are going to be demolished at the same rate. So by the time you've crushed up 15 stories below it, the top 15 stories are also going to be crushed. And so there's nothing left now to crush the rest of the building.
Something of this kind is what we should have seen when the top section of the towers collapsed onto the lower one. The upper and lower sections should have mutually destroyed each other until all the energy is dissipated and the system comes to a rest. Alternatively, as shown in this experiment with two towers made of snow, the top section could have fallen off to the side after the initial collapse. What could not have happened is this.
A little tiny chunk of the building can't possibly fall and crush the entire structure below it.
This is such a simple, fundamental concept that architects and engineers were astonished in seeing it totally ignored by NIST.
This is high school physics.
and our whole society is being led to believe that these fundamental laws of physics, hard science, don't apply anymore.
Bill, you do me a favor. On your next Radio Factor, you ask your listeners how many people think 9/11 was an inside job. You won't be able to get through the thousands of phone calls you'll get from people who believe that.
They're marginal nuts.
The more you look at stuff, especially specific incidents, specific events in or around the fateful day, it just raises a lot of questions.
Now, as Charlie Sheen ranting like a lunatic about the September 11th attacks, now word comes that Sheen will be narrating a new film about 9/11 conspiracy theories. Doesn't surprise me. This is Charlie Sheen. The fact that, he's going to get the money to, sort of go forward with his views is what is somewhat shocking to me. And the fact that he'd even express them publicly. Your thoughts?
Well, he does prove that the apple does not fall far from the very tree at all, with Martin Sheen being his father. What surprises me is Mark Cuban here. You're absolutely right. In fact, the owner of the Dallas Mavericks is funding all of this.
Yeah, I always liked him. What is he doing?
I don't know what in the world he is thinking about at this point in time, funding this.
I don't think we should be getting behind this stuff at all, and Cuban should keep his money in his pocket.
This is a disgrace to them, and Martin Sheen's kid there better watch it as far as people.
Agree.
I wouldn't watch anything.
And this, we're looking out for you, Charlie Sheen. Don't do this. You're not going to come back from it if you do. And that's not a threat. I'm just telling you, I know the country. Bo knows the country.
We won't
Gerald
watch
knows
that 2.5 kids thing at all.
Not going to do it any good.
That if they continue to attack me personally, it only gives credence to our side of the argument. People want the truth. They want the truth. And what's been offered to us resembles nothing of the sort.
We have been getting an overwhelming response to our Showbiz Tonight question of the day. Charlie Sheen speaks out. Do you agree with his assertion that there is a government cover-up of 9/11? Let's take a look at how the vote is going so far. 82% of you say yes. Only 18% of you say no.
You think that's a well-informed opinion that George Bush knew about 9/11 ahead of time, this big conspiracy, the government did this?
You're calling it a conspiracy theory, right? And that's what conspiracy theories are. Last time I checked, there are a lot of people today in Dallas standing on a grassy knoll still disputing the single bullet theory, and Arlen Specter is still in office.
You sit there and say, let's debate the issue. What? That maybe America did bring down the towers? That maybe when all the Jews left the building, maybe they knew something that we didn't all know?
You're missing my point. You're totally missing my point.
It was sad because they didn't really take a look at any of the stuff I was asking them to look at, any of the evidence or any of the stuff that generated those questions, And they said, oh, he's another tinfoil hat wearing Hollywood clown,
All of the volumes and volumes of information that contradict the official story have been blacked out from the U.S. mainstream media.
Why have so many of the major media outlets not talked about these alternative theories that exist behind 9/11? Why is that?
Mark Twain said that in the beginning a patriot is a scarce man, hated and feared and scorned, but in time when his cause succeeds, the timid join him because then it costs nothing to be a patriot. A lot of people don't have the courage that you have, AJ.
What do you think they're afraid of that's going to happen to them?
They're afraid of being beaten up by the hordes of neocon intimidators who try to go out there with their Gestapo Nazi tactics to try to bludgeon everybody with their blogs and radio shows to shut up. But they've lost power because people have learned that they're a bunch of liars. They lied about the WMDs. They've lied about everything, and now their credibility is totally blown.
Is it really that hard now to believe that September 11th?
All right, goodbye. Yes, isn't that nutcase? Let us go to...
You're a terrible American, Sean Hannity. You're a mainstream media mockingbird, a New World Order shill, and a 9/11 whitewasher.
And what happened on 9/11? Why don't you educate us, oh brilliant one?
9/11 was an inside job on one level. It was purposely allowed to happen as a pretext for the war on terror. On another level, elements within the shadow government helped and made sure it were to happen for a pretext. Why don't you open your eyes? Look at Operation Northwoods, Sean Hannity.
Yes, sir.
A declassified government plan to commit terrorism in this country by crashing planes and blaming it on a political enemy.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, okay, stop with the music. Let's talk about the issue seriously.
George
Operation Northwoods. Why don't you look it up on the internet, Sean?
Okay, if it's on the internet, it's got to be true.
No, it's a declassified document, Sean, in the National Archives, sir.
I know, sir.
Yeah,
I know.
Northwoods. Why don't you substitute the word?
Let me ask you a question.
Let
me ask you a question. Yeah, but that's not what you called about, is it, Alan?
Well, let's talk about a more serious issue,
Alan.
the fact that 9/11...
that 9/11, what, it was imploded by the government, Alan?
You got it, my friend. Operation Northwoods, declassified plan where our government planned terrorism against this country, Sean. How do you explain that, Sean?
I know. I just can't. You know what, George Bush...
Because the government's completely
Hang on a second.
gone...
I'm agreeing with George Bush did it. George Bush and Dick Cheney.
Sure, they're Skull and Bones.
Skull and Bones. Skull and Bones did it.
Members. He's a Bilderberg pawn. He's an Illuminati member.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Goodbye.
There is a group that's sending letters to our troops in Iraq and DVDs claiming 9/11 was an inside job.
Oh,
yeah. Yeah. And that they should rethink why they're fighting. Man, they ought to take these... Excuse me, folks. I'm going to say this. We ought to find the people who are doing this, take them out, and shoot them. Really. Just find the people who are sending those letters to our troops to demoralize our troops and do what they're doing. You take them out. They are traitors to this country, and shoot them. You have a problem with that? Deal with it. But anybody who would do that doesn't deserve to live. You shoot them. You call them traitors. That's what they are. And you shoot them dead. I'll pay for the bullet. Mark Dice, the founder of The Resistance, which he calls a media watchdog group, says that the U.S. government was responsible for the September 11th terrorist attacks and that the armed forces should know it.
I think that it's very beneficial that we inform them as to the true circumstances that got them in the situation that they're in. I think that if they're able to make better decisions based on the facts, and they can decide to direct their lives and their careers and the positions and the direction that they want to go, I think feeding them a constant stream of propaganda is one of the most detrimental things to them and to our service.
I don't even want to dignify this with a response, really. I mean, I don't think they're going to want to take the time to open mail from some fringe political sect. They're too busy winning this war in Iraq. They're too busy decimating Al-Qaeda. Why in the world would they care what you and a couple of other kooks in Southern California send them in the mail? They don't. These letters will end up in the toilet or on the firing range. They don't care about it. The only reason you could say what you're saying right now is because Marines for generations have been willing to fight for people like you to say outrageous things like you're saying, like 9/11 was an inside job.
How about you take Mark Dice out and put him in the middle of the firing range? Tie him to a post, don't blindfold him, let it rip and have some fun with Mark Dice. These people are just, folks, I'm telling you, outrageous.
Instead of immediately investigating the monumental failure in government, the Bush administration opposed any probe into the attacks for well over a year until mounting pressure from the victims' family members forced the issue to be addressed.
President Bush signed legislation today creating an independent commission to investigate the September 11th attack on America. The president named a supporter, Dr. Henry Kissinger, Secretary of State in the Nixon and Ford administrations, to head the panel.
He has a penchant for secrecy, which is not what's needed here.
Several family members approached Kissinger and requested a meeting at his office in New York. Prior to the meeting, Kristen Breitweiser conducted a thorough investigation of Kissinger's potential conflicts of interest.
Lori asked some very pointed questions. Would you have any Saudi American clients that you would like to tell us about? And he was very uncomfortable, kind of twisting and turning on the couch. And then she asked whether he had any clients by the name of Bin Laden. And he just about fell off his couch.
Former Secretary of State Henry Kissinger stepped down from the position Friday.
Will you testify before the commission?
This commission? You know, I don't testify. I mean, I'd be glad to visit with them.
And even the president and vice president agreed to meet with the commission, but with a catch. They insisted on meeting together behind closed doors and not under oath.
Mr. President, why are you and the Vice President insisting on appearing together before the 9/11 Commission?
Because the 9/11 Commission wants to ask us questions. That's why we're meeting, and I look forward to meeting with them and answering their questions.
Why you're appearing together rather than separately, which was their request?
Because it's a good chance for both of us to answer questions that the 9/11 Commission is looking forward to asking us, and I'm looking forward to answering them. Let's see.
We have to have one story, so I'll say part, and if I get it wrong, hedge a little bit and give me the next.
I want to thank the chairman and vice chairman for giving us a chance to share views on different subjects. And they had a lot of good questions, and I'm glad I did it. I'm glad I took the time.
What topic did the commissioners want to spend most of the time on?
probably best that I not go into the details of the conversation.
The President and Vice President of the United States, don't you think they should be able to stand up and speak their own words?
They should go under oath.
They should be, in public.
Don't you think that the families deserve to have a transcript or to be able to see what you said?
Adam, you asked me that question yesterday. I got the same answer, yeah.
Since when do you bring in witnesses that don't have to testify in open, where they're brought into closed-door rooms and allowed to testify together?
I know you said there'll be a time for politics, but you've also said you wanted to change the tone of Washington. Howard Dean recently seemed to muse aloud whether you had advanced knowledge of 9/11. Do you agree or disagree with the RNC that this kind of rhetoric borders on political hate speech?
Yeah. Look, there's time for politics. And, it's time for politics, and it's an absurd insinuation.
Once the commission was finally formed and its report released, many questions were still left unanswered. Questions that many people in this country still have. In fact, a recent poll by YouGov reveals that 38% of Americans have some doubts about the official story we've been told.
What happened that day, there are so many unanswered questions.
What would you have done on September the 12th, 2001? What would you have done if you'd been president?
I would have done a legitimate investigation to find out what exactly happened on 9/11.
The 9/11 Commission looked at virtually every aspect of the terrible tragedy of 9/11. They looked at virtually every aspect of it, but there's always remaining questions.
If you want to tell me that there's something going on beyond two planes going into the buildings, I never saw anything that suggested it. That was the most investigated event probably in FBI investigative history.
It has been looked at thoroughly by everybody. Frankly, you have people who witnessed the planes going into the buildings.
Again, the 9/11 investigation was one of the most comprehensive that I have ever seen.
Michael Scheuer is the former head of the CIA's Bin Laden unit.
Was the 9/11 Commission report a whitewash?
It was a whitewash and a lie from top to bottom.
A deal announced yesterday between the White House and the Commission investigating the September 11th attacks is proving to be rather controversial.
You and Lee Hamilton wrote in the New York Times today, you have no doubt that there was obstruction on the part of the CIA in preventing you and your panel, the 9/11 Commission, appointed by the President, approved by the Congress, from going forward with its investigation.
It's a scam. It's absolutely disgusting. I'm very much for issuing a subpoena to those in the White House that would obstruct this investigation. And that's what we have here, an obstruction of a full investigation on the most serious attack on the homeland in the last 150 years.
Lee and I write in our book that we think the commission in many ways was set up to fail.
We thought we were set up to fail. They were afraid we were going to hang somebody, that we would point the finger.
So what we have here, in my opinion, is a major cover-up. Major cover-up unlike anything I've seen since Watergate. I've been in this city 20 years. They don't want anything to come out, and they'll ruin the career and the life of anyone who dares to put forth information that's truthful.
This is an attempt to prevent the American people from knowing the facts about how we could have prevented 9/11, and people are covering it up today. And we can't let it stand.
So there's nothing reputable about that commission report. It's a piece of fiction. It should be discarded. It's omissions and lies.
We are more than a decade after the tragedy of 9/11. Why do these truthers have such staying power?
I want truth. I've been lied to. I mean, it's beyond a reasonable doubt that the 9/11 Commission did not tell this story.
The family members of the people who died on 9/11, the first responders, the survivors, these people are demanding accountability. They want to know why their loved ones died. We don't just need transparency, we also need justice. The many people in New York who suffered and people all around the world who suffered from 9/11 need the truth in order to achieve closure.
These kinds of theories are unusually resistant to correction.
The 9/11 conspiracies have stood up to the facts disproving them. The 9/11 conspiracies have not gone away.
We just want people to understand there's FBI whistleblowers, there's people within this government, there's patriots, there's citizens, family members, rescue workers, survivors of 9/11 that want their questions answered. We demand truth from our government, which we have not been getting.
American people deserve to know the truth about what happened to their nation on 9/11. In every single major respect, we have proven the government's report is false.
Will this 9/11 conspiracy theory become like the Kennedy assassination? Analyzed for generations,
as an unsolved mystery.
I think 20 years from now, people will look at 9/11 the way we look at the assassination of JFK today. It couldn't possibly have been done the way the government told us.
The establishment viciously attacks conspiracy theories, but the truth is that many of these conspiracies are supported by legitimate evidence and warrant serious debate. While many people are losing trust in the media and waking up to the New World Order's agenda, the establishment still has a small majority under their spell. Why is it so hard for the general public to accept that conspiracies exist and that the government and corporate media would lie to cover them up?
Have to understand, most of these people are not ready to be unplugged. And many of them are so inert, so hopelessly dependent on the system that they will fight to protect it.
People who don't like conspiracy theorists only because they're afraid that what they're saying might actually be true.
I know a red flag when I see one, and I know when people are reacting almost religiously. When people won't look at something, automatically people just shut off. They don't want to hear it, no matter how much evidence.
Do you think that's because as a society there's this benevolent father theory where people cannot imagine that a father would do A, B, or C to his own child, whether that's incest or murder or horrific abuse? Some people can't even hold that concept in their head. If you're a person who can't, it's impossible to have a conversation about not believing the official story.
Thinking that we're above such things, that it could happen in other countries, but it couldn't happen here, that's a lack of humility, and that's excessive pride. And so not being able to see our dark side or our weaknesses is the most dangerous thing.
It's difficult for people to comprehend and accept conspiracy theories because of fundamental aspects of psychology and sociology.
You guys are idiots! No! Have you actually done? Yes, I have. No, you guys are a disgrace. No, you guys are a disgrace because you are spitting on the memory of every person who died. You are spitting on the memory. What the hell?
I'm a family member. My uncle died on 9/11. What do you mean I'm spitting on his memory?
Because
I resent that. I really resent that. And if you're not willing, to read anything, if you're not willing to open your mouth,
all the crazy
how can you call us
theories? You fucking here on 9/11? Did you see those planes go into the building? You sick. Why can't you comprehend that planes crash into buildings because terrorists took it over? Why can't you comprehend that?
Well, we can understand.
Why can't you comprehend that?
Yeah, but the laws of physics still hold.
The building
was designed to withstand.
Not a jetliner going 600 miles an hour.
Yes,
it was not withheld. Look, because what makes you think the government could keep you secret like this, and it's an inside job?
People continue to be either oblivious to the fact that this information exists or completely resistant to looking at this information. So the question becomes why? Why is it that people have so much trouble hearing this information? From my work, I think we would be remiss not to look at the impact of trauma.
Yeah, I was. I saw what are you doing about it? I saw people die. They're dying now. They're dying now. You're a disgrace because you don't know anything. You're a disgrace. You're a disgrace. Go home and watch a reality TV. Go back to sleep. You're a hero, aren't you? Stop. So you think Bin Laden can make NORAD stand down?
As we know, the horrors of what happened on 9/11 were televised all over the world, and they were televised, in fact, live. We witnessed the deaths of almost 3,000 of our fellow Americans. We know this had a very severe and traumatic impact on a large majority of the population.
9/11 was an inside job. 9/11 was an inside job.
You were not there. You were not there.
9/11 was a psychological warfare operation. It's an example of trauma-based mind control. This is a kind of mind control developed by the CIA and other intelligence agencies that inflicts massive trauma on people and uses that trauma to essentially control their psyche. And 9/11 traumatized the American people so badly that most people just don't want to go there. It takes a certain kind of courage and a fearless desire for truth.
Social psychology often looks at the basic human need to fit in and calls this the normative social influence.
Most people want to belong to their peer group. They want to be the same as everyone else when it comes to opinions. In fact, they judge their own personal sanity by bouncing ideas off their neighbors and friends who will answer back and agree on these same topics.
People are afraid of being ostracized, they're afraid of being alienated, they're afraid of being shunned, they're afraid of their lives being inconvenienced, they'd have to change their lives, they're afraid of being confused, they're afraid of psychological deterioration.
To begin to accept the possibility that the government was involved is like opening Pandora's box. If you open the lid and peek in a little bit, it's going to challenge some of your fundamental beliefs about the world.
When we grow up, our moral and ethical compass is almost entirely forged by our environment, so our actions are often a result of the validation we get from society.
It doesn't matter if the topics or what you're given are facts or utter nonsense, as long as everyone agrees at the same time. You'll say, well, I'm sane, and your friends will all agree because they've had the same information given to them.
The human mind is like a computer. No matter how efficient it may be, its reliability is only as great as the information fed into it. If it is possible to control the input of the human mind, then no matter how intelligent a person may be, it's entirely possible to program what he will think. And yes, it's even possible to program people to laugh at the mere mention of the word conspiracy.
Controlling the media is the key to all of it, because if you control the media, you control the minds.
All you have to do is keep giving them new updates every so often, and you can change an entire country or a nation or a block of nations who are all getting the same upgrades at the same time along certain paths. You've grown up with this father figure who's on television every night at 6 o'clock in your house, in your room, staring right at you, and he's a father figure. Would he tell you a lie? So you naturally never suspect him. And this same man will lead you through new topics. He'll introduce experts on the topics. They'll have a little summary at the end of every talk, and you are now left with the conclusion that's presented to you. You don't arrive at it, it's given to you, and it's good enough for you.
The only truth you know is what you get over this tube. Right now, there is an entire generation that never knew anything that didn't come out of this tube. This tube is the gospel, the ultimate revelation. This tube can make or break presidents, popes, prime ministers. This tube is the most awesome goddamn force in the whole godless world. And woe is us if it ever falls into the hands of the wrong people.
There are hundreds of TV stations, newspapers, and radio shows. But the truth is that almost every avenue from which we get our information in the mainstream media is controlled by only 6 corporations that have one specific interest: profit. News censorship is happening every day, but not necessarily from the top down blacking out the stories, but also in the form of self-censorship, framing, backpaging, all to protect the interests of those corporate conglomerates. So who are the big 6 corporations that control nearly everything you see, hear, and read? First, there's Comcast, formerly owned by GE, which controls MSNBC, NBC, and Telemundo. And there's Disney, which owns ABC, the History Channel, and and ESPN. Next, Viacom, the parent company of MTV, Paramount, and BET. And CBS with all its affiliates. And there's News Corp, which owns Fox News, the New York Post, and the Wall Street Journal. And finally, Time Warner, the parent company of CNN, Time, and People magazine, as well as Warner Brothers.
And when the 12th largest company in the world controls the most awesome goddamn propaganda force in the whole godless world, who knows what shit will be peddled for truth on this network?
Do you trust the American government?
I have certain rules I live by. My first rule: I don't believe anything the government tells me. Nothing. And I don't take very seriously the media or the press in this country. We're nothing more than unpaid employees of the Department of Defense, and who most of the time function as kind of an unofficial public relations agency for the United States government.
Let me be absolutely clear. I don't trust politicians. No one does. I don't trust the corporations in this country that you inadvertently work for every time you take this line with me.
Let me tell you, the people don't trust you, and the people don't trust the media.
Right.
And I understand
and politicians.
In America, we are fed propaganda, and if you want to know what's happening in the world, go outside of the U.S. media, because it's owned by 4 corporations. One of them is this one. And you know what? Go outside of the country to find out what's going on in our own country, because it's frightening.
Television is not the truth. We'll tell you anything you want to hear. We lie like hell. We deal in illusions, man. None of it is true. But you people sit there day after day, night after night. We're all you know. You're beginning to believe the illusions we're spinning here. You're beginning to think that the tube is reality and that your own lives are unreal. You do whatever the tube tells you. You dress like the tube. You eat like the tube. You raise your children like the tube. You even think like the tube. This is mass madness, you maniacs.
See, my mind doesn't work that way. I got this real moron thing I do. It's called thinking. And I'm not a really good American because I like to form my own opinions. I don't just roll over when I'm told to. Sad to say, most Americans just roll over on command. Not me. Not me.
I think it's interesting that at this time where we have so little trust in our political figures, where ordinary people have so little trust in their media, that we have to remain open-minded to any kind of possibility.
I see no rational, objective discussion going on anywhere in the country. People wish to be bobbleheads. They wish to nod their head in agreement with whoever is in charge. They're too afraid to challenge authority. So that takes care of at least a majority of people.
Questioning is patriotic. Questioning is what we're supposed to do as citizens. That's our duty.
100 years from now, I don't want people reading and think that we all believed. I want people to know that there was a minority opinion that didn't go along to get along. And always remember what Thomas Jefferson said, dissension's the greatest form of patriotism. If you don't hold people's feet to the fire, elected officials, you'll get bad government. If you hold their feet to the fire, you'll get better government.
If you
You make some very sensible points, and you make some crackpot points.
That's your opinion?
Yes.
How many people here think I make crackpot points?
Yeah.
1. How many think I make sensible points? You're in a minority, my good friend. You're the minority.
Intelligence looks like insanity to drooling imbeciles.
Democracy is threatened in a way it hasn't been in 200 years, and if America doesn't stand up, we're in big trouble.
People better show up, start reading, stop being bought off. If you only have an hour a day, read something intelligent. Read several sources. Educate yourself. Find out what's going on. Don't stay asleep or go deeper into the mind control, because it will get worse for you.
If you're looking to the mainstream media to give you information, you're getting what these secret societies like the Bilderberg and the Trilateral and the Council on Foreign Relations want you to know, so that you support them and you don't fight against it.
One thing that has become important for me personally is to educate myself, is to take responsibility. There's that wonderful quote from Mahatma Gandhi where he said that we must be the change that we wish to see in the world.
You're not a conspiracy theorist if you just look at the newspaper and you said, I read this in Newsweek, I read this in, the New York Times and so forth, and I want answers.
Some conspiracy theories have turned out to be true after all.
The great Gore Vidal, he said he was not a conspiracy theorist, he was a conspiracy analyst. And he said there will come a day, if it's not already here, where it will be an article of faith that there are no conspiracy theories.
They would call me a conspiracy theorist. Now nobody's laughing. You can't just call us conspiracy theorists anymore and have us just shut up.
And the conspiracy theory labels being replaced with, wow, these people are informed. So it's now a badge of honor. It doesn't throw the public off that the so-called authority figures of dinosaur media and corrupt government tell you, oh, don't listen to them. They're conspiracy theorists.
We must expose the conspiracy to public view. If somehow every American could be made aware of the facts. If it were possible to circumvent the establishment's channels of mass communication and carry this message person to our friends and neighbors, the conspiracy would collapse like a house of cards.